Hello, welcome to a new podcast series on the writings of Marcus Tullius Cicero. I'm Josh Bowman, Executive Director of the Ciceronian Society, and our goal is to read through and discuss selected works by Cicero, starting with what is arguably his most influential work, De Officiis, or On Duties, as we call it in English. With the help of various guests, I and other members of the Ciceronian Society hope to introduce more people to the works of this great Roman statesman, with a couple possible exceptions. Most of us on this show are not specialists in Cicero, but we think this will make our engagement with his life and work more accessible to the majority of people listening who are also probably not specialists. The Ciceronian Society, however, is not exactly a Cicero studies organization. In fact, we're an explicitly Christian organization that seeks to encourage and equip Christian scholars as they serve the church. So while we will definitely bring a Christian perspective and critique to this conversation, to Cicero's writings, this does not mean we're simply going to trash him or make him a saint or something like that, right? We want to take him and his context seriously and respectfully, believing that he has much to offer on contemporary questions and issues, even if it's not always obvious what that contribution might be. I would also mention that as Christians, we know that Cicero, he's so unusual among ancient figures because we have so much information about him. So many of his writings survived. He became, in some ways, an inspiration for a lot of the language that the church would use to talk about itself, especially in the Middle Ages, right? His Latin, Caesar's Latin, as well as the ecclesiastical Latin that would develop among others. He is a huge impact on how we talk and how we think, and that is not a small role to play. Plus, we know that when it came time to invent the printing press, what's the second book off that printing press? It was On Duties, the book we're going to start talking about, because it was so important. The first, of course, being the Bible. And so we are going to take him seriously, and we are going to, and we'll have some fun. I mean, Cicero had a sense of humor, and so we're going to have to bring that up here more than once. We also welcome your questions, feedback, criticism. Go ahead, put it in the comments. And because we begin this podcast knowing that we have a lot to learn, and you're invited to help us in that process. I should also mention that this is one of two podcasts by the Ciceronian Society. The other is called The Sower and covers a wide range of topics related to our core themes of tradition, place, and things divine being a phrase of Cicero's. Be sure to check out that one as well. The Sower is published approximately every week on Sunday evenings, and our goal is to get this one to have short, regular episodes of this series until we're done, until we get to, well, wherever we want to stop. We will not be putting a time limit on the series as a whole in terms of how long we're going to do this for. We want to get to the end of at least this book. We'll see how it's going and maybe move on to other writings of Cicero. And so we hope that you'll enjoy that. I am joined today. I guess I should mention so you know who you're listening to. So in addition to being the executive director of the Ciceronian Society, I have a PhD in political theory from the Catholic University of America. I specialized in the history of Western political thought, specifically as it pertained to environmental thought, which, as far as I know, has nothing to do with Cicero, but certainly in the history of Western thought, the history of Western Christian thought in particular, Christian political thought. And today I'm joined by a legend of the Ciceronian Society who has helped edit this podcast and who has hosted a number of episodes of The Sower for us. Mr. Doctor, I just called you Mr. Dr. Grandpa Chris Anadale. Chris, tell us about yourself before we get going.
Oh, sure. Thanks a lot, Josh. Yeah, it's great to be part of this new project, as well as the Sower. Excited to launch a second podcast with the Ciceronian Society. I I have a PhD in philosophy from Emory University. My teaching focuses mainly on the history of philosophy and modern philosophy. I run a small YouTube channel on the side, where I've been doing lately a lot of videos about Schopenhauer. I'll be teaching a course on Schopenhauer in the spring of 2026 coming up here at Mount St. Mary's University, where I've taught for the past 17 years or so. I teach here in the undergraduate, the graduate, and the seminary programs. I also direct the Master's of Arts and Philosophical Studies program here at Mount St. Mary's University in Emmitsburg, Maryland. I've been involved with the Ciceronian Society since way back, probably since 2014, or so, 2013, when we were back at the University of Virginia, a long way back. Very excited to be part of this. And as you just said, I'm a grandpa now. My first grandson just turned one a couple of months ago. So I'm at an exciting new stage of life right now. And I think that's about all you need to know.
Yeah. Well, we have a lot of ground to cover. Cicero is a really interesting guy, and it's hard to overstate Cicero's importance. I've already talked about how his Latin and his the way he talked and his the construction, the way he thought about oratory, rhetoric, language, etc., has become foundational to the study of language going on. But not just to that, but also to ethics and natural law. And a lot of other schools of thought within philosophy as well as Roman history. So there's so many ways in which he is important. I mean, it got to a point where in the as early as recently as the 19th century, people didn't necessarily they wouldn't attribute quotes to Cicero because he was so well known. They would just uh, say the quote and people would know that's something Cicero said. Cicero was a key part of education, particularly this book on duties. Many of the American founders, in fact, I'm guessing all of them would have read Cicero, likely in the original Latin. And there is, again, it would be very hard to overstate, but he's been forgotten in the last 150 or so years. And I'm wondering, why that is. Yeah, what were you going to say, Chris?
I wanted to share a recent experience I had just a couple of days ago. I had left a comment on a live stream by a much larger YouTuber, friend of mine, Gregory Sadler, who runs a
Hmm.
philosophy channel on YouTube. And I'd asked him, what thinkers do you think are kind of undervalued relative to their intrinsic worth? Who are some philosophers, some writers who are dismissed too easily by people in general? And one of the first names out of his mouth in reply was Cicero. This
Yeah.
is a tremendous value in Cicero, not just in On Duties, but in many of his other works that philosophers have tended to ignore, dismissing him too much as a popularizer or a sort of practical, manualist, sort of here's how to be happy as a sort of practical how-to guide. But in fact, there's really a lot of philosophical value in Cicero. I just wanted to share that because I think we're not the only ones thinking that it's time for a Cicero revival, and there's plenty there that is valuable for us, both as academics, intellectuals, also as Christians, and as people just trying to make our way in the world today.
Yeah. And there's much to be said about how, yes, I mean, by Cicero's own admission, he is reapplying or transmitting ancient Greek thought that he loved to the world that he lives in and to future generations. So, but he's not a plagiarist. He's not just copying and pasting whatever he found in these earlier writers. He is doing an act of interpreting and applying that uh, gives originality to his work and to his thought. And it's no small thing to keep alive great ideas and thoughts that have come before you. I mean, that's one of the gifts that Cicero has given us is that, there's many thinkers and other writings that we only know because Cicero recorded it, right? And then later, there's parts of Cicero that we only know because of Augustine recorded it, but that's a different story for later. Um, let's talk a little bit about Cicero and his life. I want to go through and just give a quick biographical sketch. If you want an easier, there's a lot of books being written about him. I actually just got one on my desk. This one, Cicero, The Man and His Work by I think it's you pronounce it Andrew Dyck, Dyck. I have not read it yet. I have no idea if I can recommend it to you because it is a huge book, but it is a biography of his. There's a really accessible one by oh, his name escapes me right now. He's a popular historian. Is it Anthony Everett? Does that sound right? I think it's Cicero. Well, I'll put it in the show notes. I'll try and remember when I think of it. Very accessible uh, book that covers his life. So I'm not going to do justice to it here. But he's born January 3rd, 106 BC in Arpinum. Same as the town that the general Marius had come from, if you know Roman history at all. Marius is the one who saved Rome from a barbarian invasion in about 101 BC, while Cicero was just a boy. He is a contemporary of Caesar and Pompey. Of course, that's going to be really important for later in his life. He's actually born the same year as Pompey. But he's 6 years older than Caesar. Cicero Importantly, was what you call a novus homo, a new man. And this means he was not born to political power and prestige, but would be the first in his family to achieve political office through merit, basically an aristocrat by effort, not because it was just handed to him. Though I want to make sure I also say his family was not poor. They were local aristocrats rather than on the national stage until he is older. As a teen, he does do some military service under Pompey's father in what's called the Social War, which was between Rome and her Italian allies, which ends up expanding Roman citizenship to more people on the Italian peninsula. Very important moment in Roman history. He was well educated as a child. He studies law with Scaevola, studies oratory in different places. He survives the proscriptions of Sulla. Sulla comes after Marius as a dictator in Rome in the late 80s BC and makes his first public court appearance in the Forum in 80 BC. He travels to Greece and meets a number of famous philosophers, comes back from Greece and starts working his way up the Cursus Honorum. He's quaestor of Sicily just before Spartacus' slave revolt, and he famously discovers the grave of Archimedes. I always like that particular story. He makes a lot of effort to find it. He then moves up to be aedile, praetor, and eventually he has his son Marcus Quintus. He had married Terentia a few years before this. I can't remember the year, but Terentia is his first of two wives he will have. 63 AD is a big year for him. That's when he serves as consul. And that consulship, even though this book is going to be written, I think, um, like 20 years later ish, the consul at the time is the highest political office. Remember, there's no emperor yet. And he had there's always two consuls. The other one is Antonius, but no one really thinks about him. But famously, Cicero exposes the infamous Catilinarian conspiracy, which earned him no shortage of both fans and enemies in his time. And his reflections on that consulship and his defense of his actions play an important role in this book that we're about to read, as well as others he does. After his consulship is up, he returns to the Forum and eventually takes a case where he testifies against Clodius on a sacrilege charge. I think it was actually sleeping with the Vestal Virgin. Don't quote me on that. But this is in the late 60s and early 50s, by the way, when Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus form the first triumvirate, which Cicero refuses to be part of. Caesar becomes consul and then eventually goes off to conquer Gaul. Then the same Clodius that Cicero testified against earlier has it in for Cicero, and so he leaves town and is exiled in 58 BC. Now we're well into the last days of the Roman Republic at this point. Again, another key piece of the context here. The Roman Republic is dying, but it's hard to say whether everyone realizes it, though I think Cicero can see some of the writing on the wall. The beginning of the end, I would argue, and others have argued, is actually with the conflict over the Gracchi brothers in the mid-second century, so about 30 to 50 years before Cicero's even born. And while Marius and Sulla inspired no shortage of trauma on the Republic when Cicero's a kid, we are now entering the days of increasing civil conflict. The triumvirate is doomed to break apart, and Cicero can see much unraveling as Caesar flaunts Roman traditions and laws. And there's mob rule in Rome at times. And this is when he also starts to write works like his De Republica and De Legibus, the Republican laws, that, at least in some cases, Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, but we don't discover those until what, the late 18th, early 19th century in the Vatican?
Not certain about that. I'd have to check the sources, but it's plausible.
I know a lot of that was, we do get the text of some of that in St. Augustine's City of God um, before we actually get the actual text. Again, I think it's found in the Vatican early 19th century. Now, Cicero is then involved in some peace efforts. He's assigned by Pompey while he's living abroad. But in 48, Pompey loses to Caesar at Pharsalus. Pompey runs off to Egypt where he's murdered. Cicero is pardoned by the next year by Caesar, a pardon which Cicero wonders if it's a little dishonest in different ways. I think that comes up in this book at some point. The Republic is dying. Caesar's doing his best to kill it, defeating the remaining Republicans like Cato in North Africa. And at this point, we should mention that Cicero divorces his first wife, Terentia, and then marries Publilia. I don't know if I can say that right. But with Terentia, Cicero had welcomed a daughter, Tullia, very important piece here, who he clearly loves in a very deep and profound way. Sadly, Tullia dies after giving birth to a son in 45 BC. And this moment inspires deep grief in Cicero and many, many writings. In fact, the years of 45 and 40 BC are extremely prolific for him. Now, 44 BC, of course, is also the year that Caesar's assassinated, an act which Cicero does not participate in, though he will seek to defend it in this book. In fact, that act and its failure to restore the republic is arguably the most important piece of the political context shaping this particular work. But Cicero's position is precarious. So he has to flee again. He goes to Greece, but returns a few months later, doing his best to make Mark Antony hate him. And in his view, Antony is becoming an even worse tyrant than Caesar. Um, and he's going to argue that Brutus and Cassius should have killed Antony as well as Caesar. It's late in 44 BC when Cicero also writes De Officiis, the book that we're about to read, also called On Duties. And the subject of our podcast, this will be his last work. It's also the last extant writing that we have to his son, who's also Marcus Cicero. The second triumvirate forms between Octavian, Lepidus, and Antony. Cicero ends up on a proscription list, and he's murdered under Antony's orders on December 7th, 43 BC, at the age of 63. Now, I've skipped over a lot. Anybody who knows Cicero knows that. And as we read, we're going to have to come back to some of these people that he met, especially as he's learning, people he's learning from. Posidonius, Philo of Larissa, Diodotus, Panatius, I think is how you say it, Panadius. But yeah, we're going to have to, we'll go backwards as we need to. Yeah, so did I miss anything, Chris?
I don't think so. I might add about the character of On Duties that it's not a theoretical work of ethical philosophy
Right.
as much as it's a kind of practical manual for how to actually recognize and think about your duties as you try to live them out in your life. So it's meant to be practical as well as philosophical.
Yeah, and it also almost seems like therapy to Cicero. I mean, um, he's no longer able to be in public life, which for a Roman of his stature it is like death. Um, and after Tullia has died, after he's been exiled, I mean, this is a difficult moment for him. The question is, does he despair? Does he think this moment in history of Rome is a moment of transition, or like to something darker to the empire? Does he realize that's coming, or is it just a temporary setback that he may not survive? Because if we think of his what are called his Philippics against Antony, we see that there's ambiguity in the political situation there. There might be a chance to fix things. Cicero's running with this: like, do you fight? Do you run away? Do you just go with the flow? What do you do? And so I think that's part of that here because again, Cicero's not a pure Stoic in this sense. I mean, he's certainly influenced by the Stoics, but in that influence of the Stoics, he's asking that question: how do we live? How do we make the right decision, the honorable decision, given the circumstances? And that's not easy. And he wants to educate, especially younger men, on how to do that. And so this book is very much a part of saying, let's think through how to make honorable, good decisions according to virtue. And yeah, that's essentially On Duties for you. So are we ready to start reading?
Yeah, I think so. Why don't we dig into the very beginning of the book and we'll see what comes to mind.
Yeah, I should mention, by the way, we're using my camera's not as good. Yeah, we'll let Chris pull his up. This is the version of Cicero's On Duties it's the Cambridge Text and History of Political Thought, edited by M.T. Griffin and E.M. Atkins. I believe is it Griffin or Atkins that is the translator?
I
We
know
got
we
to
looked it up once. I think it's Atkins.
Yeah, I think it's in my notes here. I think, yeah, it is. It's translated by Margaret Atkins, edited by Miriam Griffin and Margaret Atkins. This version is published in 1991. Highly recommended. This is the version we will be reading from. And here we go. There are three books, by the way. We will start with book one. Marcus, my son, you have been a pupil of Cratipus's for a year already, and that in Athens. Consequently, you ought to be filled to overflowing with philosophical advice and instruction through the great authority of both teacher and city. The former can improve you with his knowledge, the latter by her examples. However, since I myself have always found it beneficial to combine things Latin with things Greek, something I have done not only in philosophy, but also in the practice of rhetoric. I think you should do the same, that you may be equally capable in either language. In this respect, I have, it seems to me, provided a great service to my countrymen. As a result, not only those ignorant of the Greek language, but the learned also, think that they have found some assistance both in learning and in making decisions. Now, Chris, anytime you start a book, the beginning is important.
Yeah.
Um, and so, what do you think? And again, I think we should also mention that it's not clear that this would have been the final version that Cicero would have published. So he didn't get a
Mhm.
chance to edit it. But the way he starts this is still important. It's not a dialogue like some of his other works. It's he's writing to his son, right? What do you think this opening tells us about what we're about to jump into?
Well, I get two things out of it, I think, from an initial look. One, it is addressed to his son, so it is a kind of intimate document. This is an advice given by, a brilliant man, but it's advice given to his son, to someone he cares about. His son is about 21 years old right now, and he's living, I think, in Athens. The other thing I'd get out of this is that he's talking about the value of writing in Latin and reading and doing philosophy in Latin as well as in Greek. And I think that there may be a little bit of I want to say, prestige competition here, where one might think, especially the son studying in Athens, that well, Greek is really the language of the philosophers. It's what's really valuable, and
Hmm.
Cicero is writing in Latin to his son, and in some ways is defending, I think, the value of conducting this kind of inquiry and this kind of teaching in Latin as well as in Greek, and then he's sort of expanding it as a work that might be read by some others in some version. We, in a sense, are sort of standing in for the son who's going to get this practical advice that is going to be valuable, although not perhaps directly in line with sort of Greek commentaries on Greek original texts. That's
Hmm.
my initial take on that. What's yours?
Yeah, well, one thing I was interested was to look at it was who is Cratipus? It's quite the name there. Back here in page 156 of our edition, they write that Cratipus is a eminent peripatetic philosopher born at Pergamum. Inscriptions there show that he took the name and tribe of Cicero after being granted Roman citizenship. At Cicero's request by Caesar, originally a pupil of Antiochus of Ascalon, he had deserted the academy and was teaching as a peripatetic in Mytilene on Lesbos by July of 51 BC. Anyway, so he's a teacher of Cicero's son, and apparently he's part of the family by adoption, essentially, not by blood, which I thought was interesting. Um, and he's going off to Athens. I also really like this part where Cicero talks about the great authority of both teacher and city. The former can improve you with his knowledge, the latter by her examples. How does a city teach? Right? That's an interesting idea. Does he mean the leaders of the city? Does he mean the experience of the city? Does he mean the difficulties of the city? It's not immediately obvious to me, but you know, as you said, this is not a theoretical work.
Hmm.
He wants to dive into what does it mean to live in a city and to live well.
Hmm.
The knowledge you get, the theories you get, right, are not going to be enough, Marcus, to figure all this out.
Well, you might think he's also sort of kind of calling, if the son is inclined to be a little bit brainy and maybe
Yeah.
a little bit condescending about it. This is the Roman man of action, right? This is the politician, even though he's sort of, he's in exile, he suffered some a fall from power and some disgrace and eventually will lose his life. He's still defending the idea that ethics needs to be put into action in public life, in politics, in warfare, in making practical decisions. And so he may be warning his son, or maybe us, against thinking of, ethical philosophy of goodness, of the honorable, etc., as objects of academic study. It may be saying, in a sense, either implicitly or maybe we'll read explicitly, don't get too inside of your head about this. When you're thinking about duty, it's about doing your duty in the specific context that you're in. And here's a great deal of practical advice about this. Looking ahead a little bit, one of the things that impresses me is that when Cicero comes to talk about virtue, he begins talking about wisdom and he finishes with wisdom in about two paragraphs. And then he goes on to talk about justice and courage and being a man of great soul, all the sort of practical virtues there. So I think some of that is even front loaded in here, Right. You're studying Greek, studying in Greek with the Greeks in the heart of the Greek Academy in Athens, but don't get to thinking that that's where it's at. The real business of ethics and duty is going to be in the practical world.
It makes me think about, centuries later, millennia later, where Machiavelli's, criticizing some of these ancient thinkers as well, right? He's saying, this is it. You're working with imagined states, right? He's criticizing Plato and that and the Prince there, but Cicero's already kind of moving beyond that, right? This is where his kind of synthesis of that Platonic and Aristotelian heritage in particular is very valuable. He's saying, like, look, it is good to have these nice ideas about what is ideal in a sense, but we also want to make sure we focus on what can we actually do, right? How can we actually live? Not only how ought we to live, how can we live, right? There's a I don't know, is the word efficacity? Is that even a word? It has to be efficacious, morally efficacious,
Right.
right? um, and for me, he's very much in that. I mean, unlike other philosophers that you might read in ancient times, he's deeply involved in politics. Now, you could argue, right, that Plato's an advisor to so I can't think of who it is. And Aristotle, of course, advises Alexander.
Mhm.
Who does Plato advise? Right? Isn't he an
Dionysius
advisor?
the Second,
That's
tyrant of
right. Yeah,
Syracuse.
yeah, in Syracuse. Okay. Um, Cicero, I mean, far more so than Plato and Aristotle from the political philosophy standpoint. He is very much living it. He's in the midst of it. He's a realist in that sense. Not always about himself. I like this. He's in this respect. He says, I have, it seems to me, provided great service to my countrymen. As a result, not only those ignorant of the Greek language, but the learned also think that they have found some assistance both in learning and in making decisions. I think he's referring there to, in some ways, does he see himself as making those thinkers more accessible? Like he's become a conduit of the Greeks.
Yeah, that seems plausible to me. Yeah.
Um, which I think is interesting. One of the things that, for those of you who have never read Cicero before, if you start to read him, he does have a little bit of off-putting vanity at times. It's more so in his letters to, especially to his best friend Atticus. And there's plenty of times where I'm just like, just get over yourself, man. Uh, especially for those of you who don't know, Cicero in Latin, it's a nickname. It means chickpea. How how arrogant can you be when your nickname is chickpea? So, anyways,
I was thinking, it's one of the legends of Babe Ruth was that he'd said once, it's not bragging if you can do it. And if
right?
you really are a man of magnificent quality, well, you may as well tell everybody and act like it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, shall we go on to part two here? When I say part two, by the way, I may in this version I'll say like maybe paragraph one or paragraph two.
Mhm.
This Cambridge text, they mark the numbers of sections. They're not exactly paragraphs,
I
because
think they
remember
call them
this is
chapters in the intro. Yeah.
they do okay, which is a chapter is with Cicero, it's one long sentence and you never get to the verb, but at least in Latin. And then they're not individual paragraphs. Plus, remember in Latin, there's no punctuation. I think this is still true in Cicero's time. It's just all one long block of text, right? So that thankfully we don't have to deal with that. I'll continue. And you, again, Cicero talking to Marcus, and you will certainly learn from the leading philosopher of our present generation, and you will go on doing so for as long as you like. You ought, of course, to want to learn for as long as you are not dissatisfied with your progress. However, my writings do not differ greatly from those of the Peripatetics, for we both want to be Socratics and Platonists. Chris, peripatetic is not a word that we use all the time. Maybe you could enlighten us when he says that he doesn't differ greatly from the Peripatetics. Is he simply saying he's an Aristotelian, or is it more complicated than that?
I would take it as meaning approximately in the tradition of Aristotle. I mean, we
Hmm.
should keep in mind here, it's been 3 centuries. It's been a long period of time from, classical, Plato, Socrates, antiquity
Hmm.
to his own time. So I just read it as being, yeah, sort of follower of Socrates, of that peripatetic tradition, philosophy by walking around, philosophy of the peripatos, the covered
Hmm.
porch, not the porch, the walkway. So I
The
don't have
porch,
a more dedicated read on it than that.
the porch are the Stoics, right? They're the ones
Right,
that's what
right. They
Stoa
were the
means.
stoa, the porch,
Yeah,
and the peripatos is like the covered walkway, or the sort of the pergola, I think, type structure.
interesting,
If I get this wrong,
interesting.
people can correct us in the comments, I'm sure.
Excellent, excellent. Going on. When you read them, therefore, you must use your own judgment about the content, for I shall not prevent that. You will at least acquire a richer style of Latin prose by reading my work. I would not like it to be thought that I say this arrogantly, for I grant that many others surpass my knowledge of philosophy. And if, when I have devoted the best part of my life to oratory, I then claim for myself what is proper to an orator, that I speak suitably and clearly and elegantly, I seem to have some right to lay such a claim. I think one thing that's important here is this is actually part of education. When I'm teaching my children, I'm not just teaching them stuff. Here's a bunch of information, download it, and carry it with you. We're, in a very basic sense, we're always teaching them how to talk, right? And by the way, to a point that's annoying. I don't know how you've experienced this, but sometimes my
Oh,
children
yeah.
talk like me back to me.
Hmm. Yep.
That needs to stop sometimes. Uh,
Your children are younger than mine, but absolutely, that's 100% the case.
or you find they, it's in, I'm in my 30s, late 30s, and so there's times where I catch myself like I just sounded just like my dad, right? Um,
That intensifies as you get older too.
it does really
Yeah,
okay, yeah.
absolutely.
And so it's not just that he's teaching Marcus Latin. Cicero's becoming the mental furniture for his son, and he's like, I think you could do worse, but and you might be able to do better, but I think I'm doing you a favor, Marcus, by continuing to talk to you at a distance here. His Latin prose.
Right. Well, certainly also he mentions his particular virtue. He says others know more about philosophy than I do, and you're probably studying with them if you're studying in Athens,
Yeah.
the center of the philosophical world. But I can claim for myself what is proper to an orator. So I've succeeded at oratory and all the power that comes with oratory, all the high office, and what is appropriate to me, that I should speak suitably, clearly, and elegantly. So it's not
Hmm.
arrogant for me to purport to teach you like this. This is my lane. This is what I do really, really well. And
Hmm.
so
Hmm.
here it is. So he's sort of putting his own skill, his own virtue, his own excellence alongside philosophical and intellectual excellence, and making a claim on his son's attention and on our attention as well.
Right, and as I understand it, back then oratory is a major piece of their education, right? When he's a kid, he's gonna be learning specifically oratory because it is oratory that is going to get you somewhere, right? Not everyone can read, but everyone can listen to you talk. And so if you're going to influence things, and not just in politics and in governance, but also in business, in um, teaching, and if you're going to go into the religious offices of some kind, there's a lot to be said about back then. That is the medium by which you communicate. Therefore, you better be good at it, right? And he was.
We might also say this is the one area where you might say Socrates was lacking, whether deliberately or inadvertently. He wasn't able to acquire political power, something that Plato and Aristotle both struggle with in the aftermath of the life of Socrates. And so here's Cicero saying, "Look, I have a proven track record of success in just this. I can speak well. I can bring philosophy into the public arena, into politics. I can fight for what's good." And a lot of his advice about virtue is going to be about that, fighting for what's good, doing justice, preventing injustice, selecting the honorable and courageous path, rather than being a kind of, brainy intellectual in the ivory tower, as we'd say in our
Mhm.
own time, who neglects those things in the interest of sort of pure intellectual study.
Yeah. Let's go on to chapter 3 then, as it's called. I strongly urge you, therefore, my dear Cicero, assiduously to read not only my speeches, but also the philosophical works which are now almost equal to them. The language is more forceful in the former, but the calm and restrained style of the latter ought also to be cultivated. Furthermore, I see that it has not happened to this day that the same Greek has labored in both fields, pursuing both forensic oratory and also the other quieter sort of debating. Perhaps Demetrius of Phalerum can be counted as doing so, a man of precise argument and an orator who, though not over vigorous, spoke so pleasantly that you can recognize him as a pupil of Theophrastus. I think I can say that. My achievement in either field is for others to judge, but there's no doubt that I have pursued them both. Now that's interesting, and that kind of gets to what you're saying is for Socrates, he wasn't he wasn't as good at one of them. Was Socrates giving speeches? Um, yeah, he's contrasting. He's like, you need to read my speeches and my philosophical works. What do you think is the importance there? Because he's basically saying that he seems to think that's unique to him, that he's good at
Mhm.
both.
Right. Well, I would say I'm coming off of this as somebody who teaches Plato's Apology
Yeah.
to college students and to high school students on a regular basis. And of course, one of the famous things that's said towards the end of the first speech of Apology is that a good man would be killed if he went into politics, and so a good man should do good privately. And that seems to be exactly the Socratic doctrine that Cicero is rejecting, and he's holding up his whole life as evidence of the need for it to be rejected. So if you're going to be a philosopher and you're going to be a good man, you need to, gird your loins, enter the public arena, learn the truth, and learn goodness and honor, and also learn how to speak persuasively and eloquently. And I think this is one of the things that makes Cicero a model for men like the founding fathers, right? He's a philosopher, he's wise, he's brilliant, he's self-disciplined, but he's also successful, right? He's able to actually acquire and wield power, and it doesn't corrupt him. It does lead him perhaps to his death, to an early
Yeah.
death, at the hands of inferior men. But if Cicero is to be admired, in a sense, it puts the lie, at least in his place and time, to that Socratic conviction that um, power and truth seeking would seem to move in opposite directions. And I know there's a tremendous amount of scholarship on that. I'm coming at this from a sort of beginner's perspective for the benefit of some of our readers and listeners. But I think that's absolutely part of what he has in mind is that my authority comes from um, not just my intellect, but also my oratory, my ability to speak persuasively, and to combine those things to synthesize them into my intellectual identity.
It's such a different way of thinking than today as well. I mean, you compare it to today where if a philosopher, if you go into public, if you were to pursue public office, right? Which I just as someone who cares about you, I'm like, please don't ever do that, Chris. And you've never suggested you would. I don't want to. But again, there's also like Cicero would think that reflects poorly on us, right? If we're good men, I am not claiming such a thing. That then shouldn't ought we to seek power, to wield it justly, right? Should we be afraid of power? Is there something more noble to avoid it, to say no, right?
Yeah.
And I think Cicero is saying, well, look, if you can cultivate the virtues, you should go for this.
Hmm.
You shouldn't just hide and be escapist, right? It's not
Hmm.
the philosopher king's job to I mean, granted, I don't think he's not referring to himself as that, but he is suggesting that our modern, we'll call it small d democratic aversion to the pursuit of power and office and our belief that anyone who does it is somehow corrupt and bad, that is misplaced.
Hmm. And I think this is, again, looking ahead quite a bit, but maybe 20 pages or so. When he comes to talk about justice, he's going to specifically call out the Platonic philosopher king and say he commits a certain kind of injustice by withholding his wisdom and talents and ability from the public arena, by preferring the intellectual and the abstract to doing, good, noble, honorable deeds for the benefit of the republic. In a way that he's being unjust, and he's very
Mhm.
specific, calling out Plato in books 6 and 7 of Republic, and that vision of what intellectual excellence means. So I think that
Yeah.
he's going to come with some sharp knives for at least parts of the philosophical tradition that he's inherited that many of us would be familiar with. So something to look forward to as well.
Yeah. It also gets back to the point that Cicero's not just Plato in Latin, right? I think there's some people that treat him that way, which is ridiculous. This is a great example in which he's already starting to distinguish himself from there. Let's finish this episode with chapter 4. I certainly think that Plato, if he wanted to try his hand at forensic oratory, would have been able to speak weightily and expansively. Conversely, if Demosthenes had held on the things he learned from Plato and had wanted to articulate them, he could have done so elegantly and with brilliance. I make the same judgment about Aristotle and Isocrates, each, because he so enjoyed his own pursuit, despised the other one. Now, when I had decided to write something for you at the present time, and much more in the future, I very much wanted to begin with something which was preeminently suitable to your age and to my authority. Many weighty and beneficial matters in philosophy have been discussed accurately and expansively by philosophers. However, it is their teachings and their advice on the question of duties that seem to have the widest application. For no part of life, neither public affairs nor private, neither in the forum nor at home, neither when acting on your own nor in dealings with another, can be free from duty. Everything that is honorable in a life, depends upon its cultivation, and everything dishonorable upon its neglect. I'll come to that last sentence in a minute, but I have to disagree with him here. He would say that Aristotle would be good at being able to speak well. I can't see it. I mean, Aristotle again. I've mentioned this to you privately. There's been times in my life where I thought to myself, "Dang it, Aristotle, you're right again," which gets on my nerves as a Protestant in particular. But there's there's lots of times where I'm thinking about, I just don't think Aristotle would have been a good public speaker. But if I'm not mistaken, what we have of his writings is there are they class notes that Aristotle write, or they essentially lecture notes that were transcribed.
My understanding is that they were assembled from the notes of his students, but again, I'm not an expert on that area.
Yeah.
I do know that I think Cicero had access to more of the Aristotelian corpus than we possess. I had heard somebody told me once that Cicero had been able to read some of Aristotle's dialogues, so he may have a greater sense of him as a stylist than we have now. We only have about 1/3 of Aristotle's total writings.
Okay, that's fair. And let's look at the way he ends here, which I think is really strong state. I'm going to read it again. However, it is their teachings, the teachings of the philosophers, and their advice on the question of duties that seem to have the widest application. For no part of life, neither public affairs nor private, neither in the forum nor at home, neither when acting on your own nor in dealings with another, can be free from duty. Everything that is honorable in a life depends upon its cultivation, and everything dishonorable upon its neglect. Now, he's giving a very, very broad scope to the concept of duty. He's he's not leaving anything out. He's saying, look, you can't escape this. You have to deal with this. You cannot run from it. You can't hide from it. And just the philosophic life is not an escape, right? You have got to make a decision and do what is honorable and avoid what is dishonorable. And so you need to understand duty. And what I can't think of off the top of my head is in this ancient Greek and Roman context is, where do we see the word duty show up in places like Plato and Aristotle or something similar? Is this a topic that came up maybe under a different, in a different color, a different shade before him?
That's a good question. I'm trying to think of exactly where the word duty occurs in some of the major ethical writings of Plato and
Hmm.
Aristotle. I was actually looking at page Roman numeral 45 in this text, which has a bit of a glossary in it about the
Okay.
translation. The word translated here as duty is officium, right? Of course, the title De Officiis, right? Meaning duty, dutiful service. But one of the things they note in the paragraph about the translation is that sometimes the closest translation for it is responsibilities. So
Hmm.
you have certain responsibilities, certain duties that are owed to you, that you owe to the public by virtue of your office or to your fellow man by virtue of your talents, your abilities, your situation. And so to be ethical in a sense is to do your duty. It's not in a sort of Kantian sense that it's sort of obligatory upon you in some sort of universal sense, but that it's fallen to you to do this thing, and if you don't do it, it won't be done, and it won't be done well. And a good man, right, an honorable man is a man who's able to do his duty. And I think that's the sense in which he means duty touches every element of life. You have responsibilities in every element of life. If you behave honorably well, if you are excellent, you will be a dutiful man. And if you fail in any way, do something shameful, it's because you failed in some regard to do what is demanded of you.
Right. And I think that notion of office too is really important. We think of that, yes, on the one hand, we use the word office, that we have an office, right? Maybe you're elected to it or appointed to it. That's your job. I get the sense that he has a more expansive understanding here, where it's not just that you have a job, but that you have a purpose. Almost coming later to the Christian notion of some are appointed to be teachers and pastors and elders and deacons and prayer warriors. It doesn't use that phrase in the Bible, but there's there's different roles in the church as well, and you have a responsibility to fulfill that role. I don't think Cicero is giving uh, God or any form a deity the responsibility for assigning those responsibilities. I could be wrong there, but there certainly is a sense in which the we each have certain responsibilities by virtue of who we have relationships with, the place that we find ourselves in, the tradition we're part of, the country we're part of, the skills we have. And this is, of course, is in deep contrast to today, where the focus is so much on our individual rights. Again, I have nothing against rights, but that's not the full story, right? I think there's the sense of a duty. One of the things that's interesting when I was teaching law was the let's say you see someone on the sidewalk who has just passed out, just had a heart attack. You Could someone sue you for not stopping to help them? In many instances, the answer is no. That even though you do have I mean, I think you have a moral obligation, a duty as a human person to help someone that is in distress. There's our law is at times ambivalent in terms of whether or not you have a duty to help someone, which is striking. I mean, that would be very, very different than what Cicero is talking about here, this notion of duties.
Yeah, I think plainly duties and responsibilities are tied in with relationships. So the question would be, for every duty, what sort of relationship is this duty embedded in? Is it my duty as a father towards my children, as a colleague towards a fellow colleague, towards a fellow citizen? What unites us? Well, what's the sort of social bond here? This seems very Roman
Mhm.
in its orientation. And so what is a duty for me will not be a duty for you because you lack the same kind of relatedness or not towards the same people. So one of the things that might help us to untangle a sort of modern, sort of flatter assumption of ethical duty, where we imagine that each of us is sort of largely morally identical moral actor with certain kind of obligations that we have to sort of check off, make sure that we're following the rules. And I look at the man bloody on the sidewalk or a heart attack victim on the sidewalk and say, well, you know, is there a rule that compels me to help him, right? Or that would compel anybody to help him? Instead, I would say, how am I related to this person as a brother Christian or as, fellow child of God or as a fellow citizen or as, a member of, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think to bring the social in very early in terms of ethical duty rather than to make it a matter of sort of, am I required to by some abstract principle or some principle of human nature that's quite impersonal to me
Mm.
and to the object, the person who's the object of my action.
Yeah, I mean, as much as Cicero is credited is attached to the idea of natural law, he's not appealing to that here, right, for the moment, because he's appealing to those relationships, right? In private, he says in private, but he also says in the forum, in on your own dealings with one another, right? You can't escape this duty, and so I think that's a really important insight. Well, Chris, what do you think? Do you think that's a good place to stop for episode number one?
I think it's great. I think we're on page 3. We've come a ways, and we've had a great deal to say. Honestly, I think we've we've laid some good groundwork for what we're going to do. Good place to
Yeah.
stop here.
Excellent. Well, folks, I hope you've enjoyed this first episode. We're going to keep going, so please tune in for the next episode. Be sure to keep, if you have a copy or get your own copy of On Duties, you can keep reading with us. Again, we recommend this particular translation. There are free versions online, not that translation, but you can find other free versions online. I specifically would recommend heading over to the Online Library of Liberty, published by Liberty Fund. They have some great resources, and there's many, many others online. We'll see you next time. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Cicero podcast. We're reading On Duties as members of the Ciceronian Society, looking through this incredibly important work by Marcus Tullius Cicero and what it means in his time and for us today. We're just reading it, thinking through it. What does it provoke? How does it shape what we're thinking and what we're doing? And we're also, as I said in the first episode, we're coming at this not only as professional philosophy and humanist humanities people, but also as Christians, right? Chris is a Roman Catholic. I am an Anglican, and we appreciate the contribution that these ancient Roman thinkers have given to all of the heritage that we have, the tradition, the language, and who we are in the Western world and elsewhere. We got through what are called they call them chapters. There's these little marks in the translation that we're using. Again, we talked about that in episode one, the Cambridge what is it called? The Cambridge Text in the History of Political Thought. And we are going to pick back up at chapter five. So if you haven't watched episode one, go ahead and take a look at that. I think that'll make a lot more sense if you do it that way. All right, I'll go ahead and read chapter five. The debate is, and this is the debate about duties. The debate is one in which all philosophers share. For who would dare to call himself a philosopher if he had handed down no rules of duty? But there are some teachings that undermine all duty by the ends of good and evil things that they propound. The man who defines the highest good in such a way that it has no connection with virtue, measuring it by his own advantages rather than by honorableness, cannot, if he is in agreement with himself and is not occasionally overcome by the goodness of his own nature, cultivate either friendship or justice or liberality. There can certainly be no brave man who judges that pain is the greatest evil, nor a man of restraint who defines pleasure as the highest good. All right, let's stop there for a second. So, I mean, a good philosopher is going to hand down some idea of what duty is, right? And I like that he says there can certainly be no brave man who judges that pain is the greatest evil, nor a man of restraint who defines pleasure as the highest good. To me, he's going after the Epicureans here, right? That's pretty clear.
Yeah.
And by the way, I'm Josh Bowman, executive director of the Ciceronian Society. I am once again joined by my good friend Chris Anadale, professor of philosophy at Mount St. Mary's University. So, Chris, what do you take from this opening paragraph here?
Well, I mean, he's talking about. I mean, we spoke last episode about the fact that this is going to be a work of practical philosophy. So it's advice about how to live your life, and it will include, of course, ethical truth. It will align you to the truth of things about yourself and about virtue. But it's not going to be concerned with sort of acquiring a purely intellectual understanding of the good and of the good life. It's going to be very action focused. And so I think the first thing that Cicero is doing here is when he brings up the concept of duty, is to say obviously certain theoretical frameworks are completely incompatible with living a good life. So if
Mhm.
you were to think that pain is the greatest harm that can ever befall a human being, obviously you'll never be a courageous person. You won't have a theory of virtue. Same thing's going to happen with a person who believes that pleasure is the highest good. You'll never have self-restraint or self-discipline or control that's necessary to lead a virtuous life. So in a sense, we're almost beginning with the practical virtue. You want to live an honorable, virtuous, just, great life. You want to be a good man. Well, sort of reverse engineering from that, obviously you're going to reject certain ethical frameworks as being completely incompatible with that. So there's the relevance of the abstract to daily life is that first off, set aside anything that's incompatible with it.
Yeah, and this it makes me think of like later Thomas Hobbes, the utilitarians. Right? There's an element in which Cicero is assuming or begins from the premise that there are goods, right? That there is a good, right? It he's not necessarily ascribing it to a God in the way we as Christians do, but there is a nature, capital N nature, right? There is a order to the universe. He does not find himself in a purely materialistic universe. This is not a chaos. This is a cosmos, right? And I think he sees like, look, you have to start from there. This doesn't even make any sense. How can you have duty in a purely materialistic world, right? How can you have duty in a world where pleasure is, physical pleasure in particular, is everything? Now, of course, the Epicureans were not that crude necessarily, depending on who you talk to, but the later ones, in some senses, were right. The utilitarians, in my view, ultimately are that way, where it's simply physical pleasure and pain that determines whether or not you should or should not do something. The honorableness is, and this also comes later, especially in our own time in the last 200 years, where uh, there is no higher definition of honorable. There is no natural law. It's honorable as whatever. It's the will of the stronger, right? Some group has imposed a definition of honorable on you, and that's just what you're living by. And Cicero's not saying that. He's not saying that I'm imposing a definition of honorable on anyone. I'm not forcing you to define honorable in the way I'm defining. Like, look, this is just the way it is. This is what is honorable. I didn't make this
Yeah.
up.
Yeah, well, in a sense, also remember this is a father writing to his son,
Yeah.
and part of the way it might begin is the way you or I would speak to our sons. Well, look, son, you've got some responsibilities. You
Yeah.
got some things you have to do that are your, if you don't do them, you will have failed in some important sense at being the kind of man that you are in your current situation. So let's, let's get to it. That seems to be it's not anti-intellectual, but it's going to have just as much of the abstract as is necessary to sort of frame the arena of action in which
Mhm.
actual virtual living is going to take place. Virtuous living.
Let's move on to chapter 6. All that is so obvious that the matter does not need to be debated. But I have, in any case, discussed it elsewhere. And in that case, he's referring to his book De Finibus, which we're not going to discuss here. But um, if such systems of teaching were wanting to be consistent, they could say nothing about duty, nor any advice on duty that is steady, stable, and joined to nature, be handed down except by those who believe that what is to be sought for its own sake is honorableness alone, as some say, or honorableness above all, as others say. Therefore, the giving of such advice is the peculiar province of the Stoics, Aristotelians, and Peripatetics, since the opinions of Aristo, Pyrrho, and Aurelius have long since been driven out. They would have had the right to dispute about duty if they had left any means of choice between things, so that there might be a path to the discovering of duty. I shall therefore, for the present, and on this question, follow the Stoics above all, not as an expositor, but as is my custom, drawing from their fountains when and as it seems best, using my own judgment and discretion. Now let's take a step back there. He's putting himself in context with these other thinkers, right? So we already he's dismissed the Epicureans. I don't know who Aristo, Pyrrho, and Aurelius are. Are these other Epicureans?
Pyrrho would be a skeptic.
Okay, okay.
Aristo and the others, I don't know at first glance, but Pyrrho, founder of Pyrrhonism, radical skepticism,
Oh,
as
okay, yeah.
the footnote here will note, these are all philosophical schools that reject the relevance of external things, of actual action in the world for ethical goodness. So, if I'm going to set those aside, he says, and follow the Stoic model, which includes both this kind of abstract concern for virtue, but also the necessity of acting well in the context of society and of daily life. Those are the places where you find the idea of duty as fulfilling your responsibilities in the relationships that you have. So
Hmm.
I'll set aside the systems of these other thinkers, the Epicureans, the radical skeptics, because either, like the Epicureans, they have no place for virtue, or the skeptics and some others, they really don't have any place for action and for the active life as part of moral and ethical excellence. That's
Right.
my take on it.
They just criticize, right? That's essentially, or question, right? To a point where let's just, yeah, it's all up in the head. It's all theoretical, and they spend so much time, because And we're all guilty of that at some point, right? I mean, I certainly am, where you can overthink something to the point of inaction, right? Where you just keep asking questions and dealing with all the doubt, so you don't have to act on faith. Well, I don't have all the information. I'm just not going to act. Well,
And I think a lot of us have been there, right? This is a common
yeah.
experience for people, both not just professors and former professors,
Hmm.
and academics, but just some people are way too inside their head.
Yeah.
They need practical advice, which is this book's going to be full of.
Hmm. And the Stoics in particular, he wants to, that's who he sees as being quite valuable in this particular instance. It might be good just to mention who the Stoics are, which we cannot do justice to here. Actually, on the Sower, we would have recently had a podcast with William Spears. We talked about this. But the Stoics, of course, a very old school of thought that he's going to be drawing from, going back to Zeno, who's learning from Socrates. We don't have any of Zeno's writings, but over time, the Stoics are certainly going to be focusing on virtue. I think that's an important piece of this. The virtues that they kind of articulate are going to be part of what Cicero's drawing on. And again, action. It's not just in kind of the popular Stoic movement today, where it's essentially emotionless statues of people, right? It's how do we live and act according to virtue in the world and in the place that we find ourselves. Uh, there's plenty to criticize about the Stoics. I don't think Cicero adopts their entire metaphysics. I think he's, for example, for a Stoic, there's no, in Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's nothing that is not embodied, right? That everything has a corporeal existence. I don't get the impression that Cicero would say that. Maybe I don't know. We can always wrestle with that. Again, we're not dealing with Cicero's metaphysics. We're dealing with how his ethics, right? Well, how he says we ought to live.
Right.
Um, he's not portraying himself as kind of the Stoic sage,
Mhm.
although in some ways he's like, you should still listen to me. But he's basically saying, I'm going to pick and choose the parts of the Stoics that I like, and not everything, right? And of course, Stoicism is still in development at this point. Marcus Aurelius hasn't come yet. Seneca hasn't come yet.
Mhm.
So there's a lot more to happen here.
Well, it might add as well, just remember that the goal here is living well. It's doing your duty. It's
Yeah.
it's being excellent. And so it's not being dogmatic or being fully consistent and correct. It's not working out a philosophical system. It's working out a system for life. And those
Mhm.
are, those are continuous. They link together. But his primary focus here is again upon activity.
Right. So chapters. So we're in book one. We've only read chapters, as they're called, 1 through 6, and this is a kind of the introduction to the book. His address to Marcus. Hey, Marcus, this is what I'm going to do. In the next few chapters, 7 through 10, he's going to aim at giving us the scope of the discussion, and outline some questions about duty, types of deliberation about duties. He's going to frame the conversation this way. So let's read chapter 7. Since the whole discussion is going to be about duty, I propose first to define what duty is. I am surprised that Panatius, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. I'm surprised that Panatius admitted to do this. For every piece of rational instruction upon any matter ought to begin with a definition, so that everyone understands what the subject of discussion is. Pretty straightforward there. We need to know what our terms are, what we're talking about. This is what, if you're a student listening here, especially if you're one of Chris's students, define your terms in your papers. Oh my goodness, because don't ever take for granted that we know what you mean, because so many people use words and they don't know what they're like. The biggest culprit lately for me has been democracy. Every time someone says democracy, I want to throw up. It's not because I hate democracy. It's that I have no idea what you're talking about. It seems to mean anything you want it to mean. And for duty, he really doesn't want to do that. So what is he going to say here? You were going to say something, Chris? Okay. The whole debate about duty is twofold. One kind of question relates to the end of good things. The other depends upon advice by which one ought to be fortified for all areas of life. The following are examples of the former. Are all duties complete? Is one duty more important than another? And other questions of that type. The duties for which advice has been offered do indeed relate to the end of good things, but here it is less obvious because they appear rather to have in view instruction for a life that is shared. It is these that I must expound in these books. So if I'm reading him right, and again, I might not be, he's basically saying, don't, this isn't about cataloging duties. This isn't
Right.
about giving a comprehensive list of them. It is about understanding duty in the context of relationships and situations. It's a very, for lack of a better word, historicized concept of duty. The duty is
It's
very
practical,
much
not
a, yeah, yeah,
practical, not theoretical. I'm sorry.
yeah. Is this the same as prudence?
I would say it's kind of depends on what flavor of prudence you're thinking about, but it certainly seems to have that. He doesn't use that language, but
Hmm.
we want to be right where, the rubber meets the road, so to speak, in terms of the ethical life, where you're actually making decisions in real time about what course of action you're going to pursue. You have to make judgments about what is honorable, about what is just, etc. And if your theoretical catalog of virtues that has them all sort of broken down by type and subtype and part, etc., doesn't help you make those decisions, then it's not going to be useful to you. And this is, I
Yeah.
think, again, intended to be a useful manual of ethical decision making for his son and for us, rather than a sort of, abstract catalog of, seven virtues, each with seven types, each with seven parts that we can sort of look at as a sort of geometrical,
Hmm.
object to examine. This is going to be, what does he say more about? Um, the instruction for a life that is shared. You live among other people. You have
Yeah.
relationships to those people. You have duties that you have to fulfill here and now. I think that's the focus. Historicized is a good language for it as well.
I think it's time for a tangent, Chris. We should make a segment on this show where it's just like tangent time. Um, where again, I don't want to go too crazy here, but this gets to a point again where I think Cicero is just so good because today when we think of like what a quality education is, we're often thinking about like skills you acquire and resume lines that you develop. Um, look, those are useless if you do not know how to live and work with other people, right? That if all we do as educators in a college or some kind of school is, okay, you left, you passed a bunch, you got good grades, you passed a bunch of tests, you have this reservoir of knowledge, but you don't know how to live with other people, don't know how to relate to them, don't know how to act with and for them. Um, then what have you learned? I think this goes back. I mean, that's a huge argument for why you need philosophy. I mean, the tragedy of many liberal arts institutions getting rid of the liberal arts, particularly philosophy, is just is it it's an egregious abandonment of what any reasonable person would think of as education, right? And for Cicero, and there's so many ways in which we need to learn that better. And philosophy, again, philosophy is not just living in an ivory tower and ignoring human interaction. It's trying to understand what is life, what is the good, what is the good life. Um, Again, that's my tangent there on your behalf. And you kind of get to this in your Life After Philosophy podcast, right? Essentially, why did I learn this?
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
well, it's again, in Cicero, this is the great value of Cicero, right? Is that
Hmm.
he's he's not just an abstract thinker who's breaking new frontiers. He's a synthesizer, right? He
Hmm.
brings what he's learned, Stoic ethics, perhaps here, down to earth, to his own particular place and time, to his own life, to his son's life, and he offers it to us. And thinking of, well, how do you think about how to choose between two different courses of action, one of which seems to be honorable, one of which seems to be advantageous or beneficial? Yeah, how do you choose between, courage and honesty? Should I break my promise to a friend in order to do something courageous, or should I do what seems to be the more cowardly thing, but remain true to a promise that I've made? And that's where the real world, that's where we engage with the real. There's where prudence comes in, right? That's where we
Hmm.
have to engage with the actual material out of which our life is being made, rather than the sort of the abstract theories which we might appreciate in themselves. So, again, Cicero, not neglecting the intellectual, but engaging it right down at ground level, where we're going to see the 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 good or the bad decisions which lead to our happiness or misery. Those decisions are being made right there in real time for us
Mhm.
by us.
Going on to chapter 8 then. He says, there is also another division to be made concerning duty. For a duty can be called either middle or complete. Complete duty we may, I think, label right, as the Greeks called it katathorma. I think I'm pronouncing that right. While the duty that is shared they call kathekon. They give their definitions in such a way as to define complete duty as what is right, while middle duty, they say, is that for which a persuasive reason can be given as to why it has to be done. That I have a big old question mark there. That was confusing to me. Um, I mean, is it on the one hand, it almost sounds like kathorma, complete duty, is when you know you it's obvious that you need to do this. You don't really have to. It's almost like a natural duty. I don't know, just like natural rights. You don't necessarily have to argue for it as much. It is self-evident, maybe, or and then the other one you need kind of like second precepts of reason or something where you have to argue and persuade your way to it. It almost sounds like prudence and something else. Again, I don't know if that's what this is. How do you read that? Because that's a difficult distinction for me.
Yeah, this is tricky, and I don't Greek is not one of my languages. But as far as I understand this, with the help of some of the footnotes as well that the editors have provided, I think what we're talking about is a kind of complete virtue is the I'm sorry, complete duty, the duty that the truly excellent, the wise person can do, sort of the person who's kind of leveled up in every virtue and in every good quality, is
Hmm.
capable of fully understanding the reasons for the action that he's performing. And we might say he does it best. Other people do their duty, but he does his duty best because he does it with kind of
Hmm.
full understanding, full comprehension of the intellect and assent of the will. And like there, yes, it's shining. There's the human business being done at the maximum possible intensity and level of perfection. But there's also this middle duty that most of us would get by with most of the time, not being wise men, perhaps. We can perceive our duty, we can do our duty, we can fulfill it. And that seems to be one of those things that I don't want to say it's inferior. It's good, but it's less than perfect because it doesn't have the kind of full power of wisdom and of understanding and of comprehension of all of the reasons for it behind it. It's still very, very good as fulfillment of duty. That's my take on it, but I'm willing to admit, as some people may point out in the comments, that I've badly misunderstood Cicero on just this one point.
Yeah, just that one point. Um, yeah, I think I think it's a really good way to put it because there is a sense in which when someone does something right, do you know why that was right? No, it just felt right. Well, okay, all right. Well, you did the right thing, right? I think there is something to be said about our children seem to show this at times, right? They just, oh, no one taught you that was the right thing to do, but you just knew it. I don't think he gets to the notion of natural law here, but it is an interesting idea. I'd love to know if those terms show up in the Bible and where they appear. Cathor, catorthorma, catorthema. This here, yeah, we're just gonna. This is not a Greek podcast. We'll just refer you to some much more intelligent people. Let's go on in chapter 9 then. There's a lot here. There are, in consequence, as it seems to Panaetius, and Panaetius is, as I understand, he's a Stoic, right? That particularly a Stoic philosopher that Cicero is learning from. There are three questions to deliberate when deciding upon a plan of action. In the first place, men may be uncertain whether the thing that falls under consideration is an honorable or dishonorable thing to do. Often, when they ponder this, their spirits are pulled between opposing opinions. Secondly, they investigate or debate whether or not the course they are considering is conducive to the advantageousness and pleasantness of life, to opportunities and resources for doing things, to wealth and to power, all of which enable them to benefit themselves and those dear to them. All such deliberation falls under reasoning about what is beneficial. So again, number one, first question, honorable. Second question, is it beneficial? The third type of uncertainty arises when something apparently beneficial appears to conflict with what is honorable. Benefit seems to snatch you to its side, and honorableness in its turn to call you back. Consequently, the spirit is pulled this way and that in its deliberation, and it arouses in its reflection a care that is double-edged. So essentially, we got three questions here. Okay, this action that I could take, is it honorable? Okay.
Mhm.
Is it beneficial? Okay. What if what if it's one but not the other? What do I do?
Right.
Right?
Or what, yeah, what if, yeah, what if I'm pulled between two actions, one of which is beneficial, one of which is honorable, which only being able to do one, which shall I choose?
Yeah. So that's interesting. So let's take a biblical example. The
Mhm.
Good Samaritan, right? There's a Samaritan who's been beaten, robbed, thrown in a ditch, uh, and passed by. This is in is it I think it's Luke chapter 15. I could be wrong. And so finally, well, no, it's a who's it's just a man. They just say it's a man thrown in a ditch, right?
Traveler. Yeah.
Traveler. Yeah, it's just a traveler. The Samaritan's the one going by. Okay, so the Samaritan's the one going by. The Samaritan has a decision to make. Is it honorable to save this man who's been beaten
Mhm.
and robbed? Is it beneficial? It certainly seems honorable, right? I think we can make an argument there that it is honorable to save someone who is first of all innocent, right? They they didn't deserve this mugging that they got. It is honorable to use one's resources and time and energy to help save someone from what would likely have been their death had they been left, just left there to die.
Mhm.
But is it beneficial? Well, this person's been robbed. They have nothing to give this good Samaritan. They can't repay them. It's going to cost this Samaritan money and time and energy. It's going to make them late probably for wherever they're trying to get to because they're on a journey. It's not been, so other than making you, there's no evidence that this, of course, it's a parable, but it plays out in real life on many occasions, right? It's not clear that the Samaritan is gaining anything, at least in this life, in this side of heaven, if you will, from doing this. And so that might be an example where it's not beneficial, but it's honorable. For Cicero, do you do it? I mean, I think we're going to get to that, right?
Yeah, this is funny. My approach to this was a little bit different from yours. I didn't imagine a single action being evaluated on all three axes or with all three
Okay.
questions. I took him to be saying, it may this works just fine. I'll get to the scriptural example in a second, but um, the first question is, I'm torn between I'm considering an action and I have to ask, is this the honorable thing to do, or is there some other course of action that is honorable or as we'll see later on, more honorable? So I say, is this honorable or shameful for me to do this? And it may
Mm-hmm.
be, that's sort of to reach into the story a little bit, it may have been shameful for the Levite to help the man. Why? Because it would require him to compromise his position in the temple. I mean, this
Right.
is not a context of which Cicero would have thought, but
Right.
I could say, given me and my relationships, my responsibilities, can honor be satisfied? Does honor demand that I act in this way? Right? Am I, on my way to an important appointment? Now, the fact that the man might die seems to override any, concern for mine for honor. If I have to, be late to an appointment with my boss, unless it was a, vitally important appointment, we would say that's less important than the man's life. But you can think about the reasoning about honor. Is this the honorable thing to do? And we can come up with examples like that, including the Samaritan example. Is it beneficial? He specifically says here, just get at it. Does it, um, how does it relate to the advantageousness and pleasantness of life, to
Mm,
opportunities and resources for doing things, to wealth and to power, which allow us to benefit ourselves and those near to us? So we
mm,
could say, the man, the Samaritan who does spend the money on the inn and the food for the recovery of the wounded man can't spend that money on something else, right? There's something else he's taking it away from. Perhaps he's a very wealthy Samaritan, or perhaps he now has to go home to his family and to say, it's going to be beans and rice for the next
okay.
week because I gave the money that I was carrying with me to save this man's life. And so here's a question of, I did what was disadvantageous. Why? Perhaps because it was honorable. So that's the third kind, right? Is the conflict between those two factors. But
Hmm.
there's more maybe to each of those than we're letting on right now. But what what do you think? How does that affect what you think?
Yeah, I'm starting to think also about where this could go wrong. Um, we keep using the word honorable, and there are certain cultures, including the Stoics at times, as well as later um, among the Japanese, right, where the honorable thing to do is commit suicide, right? When you can't answer this question, when that, there are certain moments in history where, as a Christian, I'm like, I can't consider that honorable, right? Is honorable a cultural construct? Is Cicero not appreciating? Because I don't think Cicero thinks that. I think Cicero thinks it's there is a capital N nature from which honor is being determined here. But I was thinking about as you were talking, like how this could go wrong, where the question of honorableness, does honor demand that I do this? It may, uh, I'm grateful Jesus did not ask that question to a point, right? There's nothing honorable about the cross, right? There is a sense in which we can't take this too far. Uh, yeah, or the Romans, for example. I mean, think of the martial warrior life, right, of a Roman. Is it honorable to kill someone in war? Now, we're not going to get in just war theory here. I don't think that shows up here. But that's where another issue is gonna show up, right? Is it honorable to? It may be honorable to die for one's country. Is it honorable to kill for one's country, right? um, and so I think yeah. Go ahead, Chris.
Well, thanks. I just looked back again at the notes on the translation, the glossary from this is Roman numeral let's see, 44 and 45
Okay.
in the introduction to this text. Just helps a little bit here with the specifics of what honorable means. Honorable translates honestus. It says a good book one is a guide to discovering whether an action is honestus or turpus. You think turpus, sort of, think of turpentine or things that are offensive. Honestus is analyzed as consisting of the four primary virtues, but the nature of honestus connected with honor, an honor or an office, and reputation is public. I think this is another important point that we've made before. The Our culture tends to internalize virtue and divorce it from social standing, but for Cicero, what counts as um, what counts as honorable is your behavior in public. It's the
Mhm.
good man is the man who is well regarded. Why? Because he is a man of excellence. And getting into the point that you just made, right? That is this a cultural construct? It has some elements to it, but the good man is in principle honorable and deserves honor, respect, and admiration from other men. So honestus here is translated as honorable, and its opposite turpus is dishonorable. But this is in the sense of putting yourself in a situation that you're doing things that would call down upon you the objective, negative judgment, the disdain of good people. So perhaps that helps a little bit in terms of what precise concept he's getting at here.
Yeah, a little bit. Although again, I think it complicates his, how we can read him, right? Because there is a sense in which, well, look, do we want to discard the idea of honor? I'm not ready to do that yet. I think some would. I think there's reasons to be skeptical of focusing on honor too much because of what you just said. Because if it's well, if it the deserving honor means that someone has to bestow the honor upon you. You cannot bestow it on yourself. If you do the actions and then others honor you. From a Christian perspective, the only one who deserves the honor is God, and the only person that we should care about who and what they think of us again is God. And so
Yeah.
again, now I'm not criticizing. I'm not saying, well, Cicero, you're insufficiently Christian, but you could also say that this is where Christianity is going to be when it comes around, because Cicero is not he's not being innovative here in a sense. Like he's speaking, he is kind of saying not it's not even the quiet part out loud. He's saying out loud what the kind of the Roman ethos is or
Right.
ought to be, or the kind of the ideal of it. And so when Christianity comes on the scene, they're going to be rewiring the way the Romans think about honor, and they may not even use that term.
No, I think that's right. You might substitute instead of behave in such a way that you objectively deserve the admiration of your fellow, aristocrats in your social class. You say, neglect all of that, throw all that away, and act in such a way that you deserve the approval of God, and that's enough
Hmm.
for you. That seems to be part of the lesson of the Good Samaritan story, right?
Yeah.
Whereas a man in Cicero's position in Jewish society might have praised the Levite, if I have the name right,
Hmm.
for passing by because he had a higher duty to the temple to retain a certain kind of ritual purity. Um, there's a lot of people depend upon that. And if Cicero, someone like Cicero, might have approved and said, okay, doing the honorable thing there, um, under some circumstance would be superior. We might say that's not even the honorable thing.
Yeah.
That in the eyes of the Lord, it is only the Samaritan who is justified by his
Right.
behavior. Everybody else made some kind of mistake, but that's the rewiring, as you say, from social class as the highest moral arbiter and sort of deliverer of the sought after approval to the Lord himself, to God who sees into your heart. So that's going to require different thinking about the relation between the internal and the external as well from what Cicero has. But here's an important background document then for understanding what gets rewired by the Christians
E-
eventually.
Exactly. This gets to a point where I hope this series is helpful to our listeners because in many ways we're all we may not have been influenced by Roman Stoics in as we become more Christian, right? There's a lot of kind of underlying assumptions about what is right, wrong, good, true, and beautiful that we are raised with, and that as we, especially as Christians, seek to be more Christ-like, we're going to have to ask ourselves, well, where did this idea come from, right? Why does this feel so different, right? Why does Christianity, especially nowadays, as we become more, it's more of a post-Christian Western world, the stark contrast that Christianity brings is going to be important. And again, I don't want to. This is also a reason why I think it's so helpful for Christians to read classical authors like this. It reminds us of the first of all, a lot of the things that we take for granted about our own faith and our own tradition, right? What it came into and changed. Also, it reveals to us because there's plenty of times in Cicero where I might think, yeah, you're right, Cicero. And then if I go to read Augustine, who's commenting on the same passage, he's going to say, no, Cicero's wrong. And I'll be like, well, crap. Where am I here? And I don't think Cicero's wrong about everything. I want to make that very clear. I think this is a valuable exercise. Chapter 10. This is we'll conclude with this section. Cicero's gone through these three questions. He's essentially going to add two more. Chapter 10, he writes, although it is a very great fault to omit anything when categorizing, this division leaves out two things. The three questions we just talked about, it leaves out two things. For one often deliberates not only whether a thing is honorable or dishonorable, but also which of two proposed courses that are honorable is the more honorable, or of two that are beneficial, the more beneficial. Therefore, the method that Palladius thought should be threefold turns out to require division into five parts. First, therefore, we must discuss what is honorable, but asking it of it two questions. Then what is beneficial by a parallel method? And then the comparison of the two. I like that. He's because it's this is real life, right? A lot of times it's you're stuck between what is right and what seems right, and you can't decide you know, what it is. Or there's more than one honorable or beneficial course of action. Was one more honorable or beneficial than the other? What if we don't know, right? I think there's, I think that's this again gets to Cicero is he's he's being real to use that phrase, right? He's not he's very much in tune with the way that this is. Think of he's going to have to deal with this at some point in this book, right? Was it honorable to kill Julius Caesar?
Hmm.
Uh,
Yeah.
was it more honorable to I don't know, and put him in exile? Would it be more honorable to bribe, buy Caesar off? You
Right.
know, there's more than one way to deal with a tyrant. So, he's gonna be wrestling this he's gonna be wrestling with this himself as well. Would it have been more honorable or less honorable to kill Mark Antony? It sounds like it'd be more beneficial, right? So there's he's dealing with that here. Yeah.
So, yeah, I think what we've got here is the setup for the remainder of the book. Book
Right.
one is going to be about the honorable versus the dishonorable, the honestas versus the turpis. Um, First, is this action honorable or not? And then between two proposed actions, which one is more honorable and therefore more worthy of choice? Book two, the same thing, but with the same two types of questions, but with the advantageous, right? Is is this action advantageous? And then between two actions that are both advantageous, which one is superior? How do we choose between them? And then book three, how to resolve conflicts between one action that's honorable and a rival possible action which is advantageous but seems to be lacking in honor. How do we choose between those? That seems to be the place where we would really be stuck. But presumably, if we've thought through our principles and then also the practical applications of the rule, both for deciding on the honorable and deciding about the advantageous, we'll be in a good position to wrap up conflicts between them. And then presumably we've got a whole picture of practical life, how we're going to live our lives.
Hmm. Hmm. There's a lot of there'll be limitations at the end of it, but I think again, just gets to Cicero's practicality here, and because it's very, very real that so many times in life we're faced with it's not always obvious what the right thing is or what the more right thing is, right? Life does not come at you with, uh, mathematical precision, right? It's so difficult to decide to make certain decisions, but you're going to have to act. You're going to have to do figure out what in the world it is to do. I mean, I think this also gets the notions of, certainly an idea that's missing in non-Christian thought is grace, right? Without grace, this sucks, right? You could be faced with some really, really awful situations, and look, if you fail, that's it, right? But there is this, and I think there is a Stoic teaching where things can be. They wouldn't say that God works all things to the good, but there is a way in which things can be worked toward the good in Stoic thought. But I think there is, you almost feel bad to a point where you need to do the right thing. Yes, try your hardest, young Marcus. But if only Marcus knew about grace, there'd
Mhm.
be less. There's that's a lot of weight to put on someone, right?
Yeah. And the only thing I'd add, maybe from a philosophical perspective, is the default way that a lot of young people approach ethics is in terms of rule following. Right?
Hmm.
What's the rule that I have to follow? Have I followed the rule? In which case, I've got a check mark next to the rule, and I'm I'm okay. I've done my duty. I've done what I'm supposed to do. But this is not the sort of checklist rule following that Cicero's giving us. He's giving us, he says, look, you have to make some very careful, difficult prudential judgments between rival courses of action, some of which are going to be more or less honorable, some of which more or less advantageous, some of which involve conflict between the two. You need to think through not just the principles and the sort of abstract rules, and people know this, even following rules seems simple until you realize that you have to decide which rule is the right rule to follow in this situation, in which case you're right back where prudence would have taken you in the first place.
Hmm.
So I think that's, again, testimony to the value of this work and its practicality for even for us, many centuries, millennia later, as a work of as sort of a manual, a guide to life, and a sort of training in how to do the kind of decision making we're going to need to do in order to live well, in order to live excellent lives.
Excellent. Well, Chris, thank you so much for joining me on this discussion. Another really, really, really good time. Didn't get super far, but we're through, almost all of the introductory material of this book, and I'm looking forward to the next episode.
Me too.
All right. Thanks, Chris.
Bye.
Hey, everyone. Welcome back to the On Duties podcast by the Ciceronian Society. This is a great opportunity to continue reading Cicero's most influential work, On Duties. And I am Josh Bowman, Executive Director of the Ciceronian Society, and I am joined by Chris Anadale.
Hi, how you doing? Chris Anadale of Mount St. Mary's University in philosophy.
Yeah. So glad to have you all back. If you haven't been reading with us, go back and read listen to the first two episodes, or watch the first two episodes. We're not that far into this. We're in book one of Cicero's On Duties. We're using the Cambridge Text and the History of Political Thought. We put a link to the translation we're using down there. And again, we're just reading this and seeing what it inspires us to talk about, and connecting it to other ideas and thoughts and things, trying to keep it as accessible as we can for a broad audience, but also just as a reminder, Chris and I are Christians, and we bring that perspective to this show and to this book. And we also are people who have an admiration for Cicero. And so while we will be critical of him, we also appreciate his influence and importance in the history of Western thought. So let's start with chapter 11.
Okay.
From the beginning, nature has assigned to every type of creature the tendency to preserve itself, its life and body, and to reject anything that seems likely to harm them, seeking and procuring everything necessary for life, such as nourishment, shelter, and so on. Common also to all animals is the impulse to unite for the purpose of procreation and a certain care for those who are born. That the great difference between man and beast, however, is this: the latter adapts itself only in responding to the senses, and only to something that is present and at hand, scarcely aware of the past or future. Man, however, is a sharer in reason. This enables him to perceive consequences, to comprehend the causes of things, their precursors and their antecedents, so to speak, to compare similarities and to link and combine future with present events, and by seeing with ease the whole course of life, to prepare whatever is necessary for living it. Now, remember, up to this point, he's introducing his topic. He's talking about duties. He began by talking about, what is or is not honorable, right? So if we're going to define what duty is, we got to figure out what is honorable, what is dishonorable, what is beneficial, what is not beneficial, what do we do when they conflict? How do we think about, and then he adds two additional questions of what is more or less honorable, what is more or less beneficial. That's going to be an important piece of this as well. But we got to get to the human nature. Why does this even matter to us? I think this is a really important point because a lot of people today, that's a really general thing to say, but a lot of people today operate or proceed from a unreflective anthropology. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
So we haven't asked the question of what does it mean to be human and be a person? We just assume a bunch, right? And for Cicero, he wants to lay it out right away. And it kind of reminds me of later social contract theorists, but what he's saying is man's not just an animal, uh, to a point. He is an animal, but he's distinguished by reason. And this is a really key point for all Roman philosophers, and as well as the Greeks, right? Is that notion of reason? You're not just, he doesn't say this explicitly, but I would also add he seems to appreciate the fact that humans have something like imagination and memory. Um, we can see ourselves historically in time in a way that perhaps animals, at least according to Cicero, can't. Now, obviously, he doesn't have all the knowledge we do biologically about animals today, and that there are a lot more advances, right, than he would have ever realized. He I don't know how much he knew about an octopus, for example. They're quite bright, but he's he's onto something here. He notices, well, what Christians will emphasize, as well as Jews, that we are made in the image of God. Something is different, right? And so, yeah, I just, I'll give you a second to comment on that, Chris, about chapter 11. He's laying out his anthropology there. What do you think?
Yeah, I think here he's obviously giving us he wants to talk about the roots of the virtues in the next few chapters. And here we're talking about the root of all virtues. So we begin with nature. Our nature is animal. We have a biological nature. And then this is very classical, very Roman. On this biological foundation, then we build with reason what is additional to it. So we are animals, so we have this animal biology, so we need what is needful for life, for nutrition, for creating and caring for our young. So we're oriented by nature towards this kind of self-preservation and flourishing and building up of ourselves and our families. But going beyond the beasts, we have not just the senses, but reason. Reason puts us in relationship with time. And so now we have a relationship to the past and the future. This gives us a sense of history, a sense of anticipation, allows us to build culture. It allows a father to write a letter to his son instructing him on how to live well, because he has to live not just as an animal, but as a man. That means to live rationally. It means to live as a philosopher in some key sense. So all these virtues, although they're very practical, are devoted to this kind of philosophical perfection of the rational man, which is going to converge with and build upon the biological man. That's my takeaway from this part.
Yeah, we could build on this, throughout, but is there something here that a more modern reader might scoff at? I mean, is there reason? Is the classical concept of reason more elevated than the modern one? Does that make sense? That
Mhm.
to me, there's a kind of notion of modern reason that seems to almost, for lack of a better word, reduce reason
Mhm.
to calculating, right?
Right.
Um, to what an algorithm can do, right? But Cicero means something more, right?
I think he does, but then again, he is, as we said in a previous episode, he's a man of action, and so he wants to
Right.
focus upon the virtues of action, not upon just sort of speculative reason grasping truth in itself. He's not about contemplation as a kind of human perfection. Um, he seems to be presenting a vision of reason which at least is kind of friendly towards this sort of more instrumental focus that we'd associate with
Hmm.
modern kind of, the reason from David Hume forward.
Yeah.
Reason is about helping us to achieve our goals. But the difference here is that I think, without going sort of full on all the way up to 11 on speculative reason, he is
Yeah.
seeing this reason in the context of building upon our nature and our natural instinct. So he does say here, um, the man is a sharer in reason, and this share in reason enables him to perceive consequences and to comprehend the causes of things. And so we do grasp the reality that's out there. That's the sort of speculative element that I think is still in Cicero. But as we'll see in some later chapters, when he comes to wisdom, he's going to sort of deal with wisdom very quickly and then move on to the virtues of political life and of action, which is really where his heart is and where his focus is, because I don't
Hmm.
think he believes that some sort of perfection of an abstract speculative reason constitutes the true perfection, the true sense of duty that he's trying to instruct his son in here.
Right. Right. Chris, why don't you go ahead and read chapter 12 to keep us going here?
Sure, sure. We're on page 6 of the Cambridge version,
Right.
chapter 12. The same nature, by the power of reason, unites one man to another for the fellowship both of common speech and of life, creating above all a particular love for his offspring. It drives him to desire that men should meet together and congregate, and that he should join them himself, and for the same reason to devote himself to providing whatever may contribute to the comfort and sustenance not only of himself, but also of his wife, his children, and others whom he holds dear and ought to protect. Furthermore, such concern also arouses men's spirits, rendering them greater for achieving whatever they attempt. It's the end of chapter 12.
Hmm.
You want to take the lead commentary on
I
that, Josh?
Yeah, I'll start with that,
Mhm.
and then I'll hand it back over to you pretty quickly
Mhm.
here. There's, well, first of all, I just want to commend to our listeners one of the strategies of studying a book like this is similar to what Christians will call Lectio Divina. I don't want to get into this too much,
Mhm.
but with some Christians, they'll, I'll read a Bible passage, reflect on it, someone else will read it, and you experience a passage differently between when you read it and when you listen to it, I think. And while there's a spiritual element to the Christian Lectio Divina reading of the Bible, I think there's also something to be said about listening to someone else read, going back and forth, as I think we're going to try and do now, listening to these different paragraphs. It's just a recommendation if you're reading this book or any other one. But I was struck here by it sounds Aristotelian in a way, right? We by nature of the power of reason, we come together. We're made for one another, right? We are
Mhm.
by nature political communal animals. We're not isolated. We're not meant to be to live away from one another. And this is reflected in Cicero's writing on friendship and elsewhere. And it's not just, as I see it, he's not strictly Hobbesian, in the sense that it's not just some kind of cold calculating, we need to get together to survive. But that there seems to be more here. In fact, I think that this is where some people see in him kind of a proto-Lockean liberalism. I don't want to get into this too much, but there's a sense in which Cicero recognizes that in the state of nature, right, before civilization, if there was ever a thing,
Mhm.
that we are already driven toward community. That community, family, reason, all of this stuff is pre-political. You don't need a
Mhm.
government to figure it out. And I think the reality of pre-political um, uh, community in that sense is really important for Cicero, the Romans, and others. Yeah, what are your thoughts on this chapter?
Well, I'm thinking here, he's obviously he's talked about the foundation, the root of reason generally in nature and reason. And now he's going to go through the next few chapters specific virtues. And this is where I think he introduces the virtue of justice, which is the virtue of excellence in communal living. Well, where does it come from? It comes from reason. Reason drives us to live in community, to relate to each other. As you say, this grows out of our nature, driven also by reason. I was thinking, as you were reading it, of the fact that that Cicero is often taken as the kind of opposite number by Machiavelli, by Hobbes, and some other early moderns, as the main figure who needs to be refuted or to be broken with in the creation
Yeah.
of modern contract theory, where the emergence of political society is artificial and is distinct from the natural. Here it seems to be in an Aristotelian style, kind of more continuous, right?
hmm
Nature and reason
hmm
bring us into community. So both by nature and by reason, we beget children, we marry, we care for our family, we seek to provide them with goods that they need in order to flourish and to
hmm
do well. So we seek prosperity for ourselves, our loved ones, and those we respect and care about in communities. So there's a sort of natural extension of the human spirit of generosity and hard work. And I love the way that this chapter ends with a sort of teaser looking forward. It also elevates man's spirit. It makes him better and more noble and better able to
hmm
achieve great things, right? And that it's the doing of great and noble deeds in the arena of justice, in the arena of politics, that I think is Cicero's great love, and where he's going to focus a lot of his attention in giving this advice to his son on duties, on duties.
And you need, I think Cicero recognizes here elsewhere the need for friends, for society to do these great things. I mean, I think I, Cicero doesn't strike me as someone who's elevating just that the great. I mean, the individual needs to act right in kind of a Aristotelian spoudios, the great man of prudence and action, or however you're meant to say it, is there's a sense in which there needs to be a community behind you, and I find that's true in life generally. That we have more courage, we have more, yeah, it elevates our spirit. We're more creative
Mhm.
with one another, in that sense.
Yeah,
Let's move on to chapter 13. I'll go ahead and read that there.
great.
The search for truth and its investigation are, above all, peculiar to man. Therefore, whenever we are free from necessary business and other concerns, we are eager to see or to hear or to learn, considering that the discovery of obscure or wonderful things is necessary for a blessed life. Consequently, we understand that what is true, simple, and pure is most fitted to the nature of man. In addition to this desire for seeing the truth, there is a kind of impulse towards preeminence, so that a spirit that is well trained by nature will not be willing to obey for its own benefit someone whose advice, teaching, and commands are not just and lawful. Greatness of spirit and a disdain for human things arise as a result. I don't have a ton of notes for this particular chapter. I mean, he seems to be getting into the concept of leisure to a point, right? Humans pursue the truth. Um, Consequently, he says we understand that what is true, simple, and pure is most fitted to the nature of man. Um, but this it's the second half that interests me here of this little chapter. This impulse toward preeminence,
Yeah.
that we want to be better. Is that there's this greatness of spirit?
Yeah,
And he says, and a disdain for human things. I question that. I wonder if that translation is good, but that to me strikes me as very not modern and I think in a positive sense, where the ancients said it's okay to be better, it's okay to be great. But today, if it's viewed as inegalitarian, undemocratic, arrogant, right?
right.
Is that kind of what was that what he means by greatness of spirit? The desire to be preeminent and honorable and good.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it's interesting to me talking here about the roots of wisdom. The natural root of
Hmm.
wisdom is, as you say, it comes out of leisure, right? So when we have leisure, we're able to pursue the truth. We see the truth. We love what is simple and pure, which is most fitted to our nature. And this is where this idea, I think of it under the label of nobility, right? There's something about knowing the truth that ennobles us, that raises us up, that makes us want more truth, that makes us want to be pure and great and admirable like the truth. And you might suppose, just sight unseen, that greatness of spirit would fall under the category of justice, that somehow my concern for doing great things in the arena for the sake of the community is where my greatness of spirit would come from. But Cicero here seems to be placing its origin with wisdom. It's when I know the truth, when I
Hmm.
love the truth, that I become nobler and better, and I desire to be even nobler and better still, so that I can be more of the character of the truth that I know. So that's it. That does seem Aristotelian in its sense, although it's um it's still going to be, I think, more practically focused, not focused upon contemplation as a kind of withdrawal from the world of action.
Right.
But yeah, so a spirit that is well trained by nature will not be willing to obey for its own benefit someone whose advice and commands are not just and lawful. That is, I won't be willing to stain myself by getting ahead, by cooperating with an unjust law or an unjust ruler. That itself would disgust me, right? Because of my
Hmm.
love of truth and my desire to become more like the truth myself. That's my take on it approximately.
Yeah. It definitely distinguishes him from Machiavelli later on, right?
Oh yeah.
And in many ways. Let's continue on. Chris, if you could let's read chapter 14 and 15 together. Well, yeah, let's read chapter 14 first,
Sure.
and then go from there in the interest of time.
All right, chapter 14 on page 7. The power of nature and reason is not insignificant in this too, that this animal alone perceives what order there is, what seemliness, what limit to words and deeds. No other animal, therefore, perceives the beauty, the loveliness, and the consequence of the parts, of the things that sight perceives. Nature and reason transfer this by analogy from the eyes to the mind, thinking that beauty, constancy, and order should be preserved, and much more so in one's decisions and in one's deeds. They are careful also to do nothing in an unseemly or effeminate way, in all their opinions and actions, thinking and doing nothing licentiously. The honorableness that we seek is created from and accomplished by these things. Even if it is not accorded acclaim, it is still honorable, and as we truly claim, even if no one praises it, it is by nature worthy of praise.
This is great. I wrote next to this passage, imagination, and uh, that there's we humans are able to live in a world of meaning in a way that I'm not sure any other animal could claim. I think that there's certainly feeling. I mean, I have a dog. Dogs can love and be sad. But there's, I was watching. This is really random, but I was watching a short video on YouTube. It was yesterday. Some guy he strapped a like a GoPro camera to a mountain goat, and so you would get the perspective of the mountain goat running through the mountains, and the stuff that this mountain goat would see was amazing. Like to me, it's gorgeous, inspirational, it's beautiful. Does the mountain goat care? Right? Does the mountain goat stop and be like, wow, that valley, I've seen it 100 times, but it never gets old. Like I don't know. And I think I like the fact that Cicero is kind of bringing up this fact that humans can look at the world and see the meaning, see the analogies, put the pieces together. if I understand it right, I don't know of a word at this point in Latin, in classical Latin, where the word imagination exists. Aristotle has something like it. Is it fantasia or fan? Yeah, something like that. PH. Anyways, but it's not really till Augustine that we get the word imagination as we know it today in De Trinitate, I believe, where it first emerges. And I think in some ways Cicero is pointing in that direction. I don't know. It's just some brief thoughts on this chapter.
Sure. Sure. I think from my own perspective, I think here he's talking about the roots of moderation. Now, how is it that we
Okay.
become moderate? We seek to govern ourselves in a certain way, to grow in a certain virtue, to conform ourselves to the truth that we know. We see beauty and order in nature. This is sort of subsequent to wisdom, to seeing the truth. We see beauty and order, and then we apply it imaginatively, as you say, backwards to ourselves, to our soul. We say, I also should be orderly and beautiful inside, spiritually, mentally as well. So uh, that's an interesting sort of origin, right? It's the external order that I perceive through senses and then reason that is then applied backwards to me, right? And so I say, okay,
Mhm.
now I have an obligation, now I have a duty, now I have something that is needful, that is appropriate, which is for me to become um, constant, to preserve constancy and order in my decisions and my deeds. That is to be moderate, to be well governed and self-controlled, to do nothing unseemly or effeminate. Both of those, I think, contrary to the idea of what is appropriate to one's station, which is the sort of key concept of duty of officiis here.
Right.
I think I was especially interested in the final two sentences of this chapter, that even if it is accorded no acclaim, it is still honorable in itself and deserving of honor. And this is where I remembered, this is a father writing to his son who is,
Yeah.
studying abroad in Athens, as it were, and reminding him, even if you're the only one who sees this, it is still has its value in itself and is worthy of being pursued by an excellent man, even if nobody thinks so.
Right. And that certainly contrasts with a lot of, well, if no one values what you're looking at, that truth, then, what good is it?
Right. Well, the distinction between what is honorable and what is called honorable. Yeah.
Right, right, right. Okay, well, we could obviously expound on that, but he's going to do that, so we'll come back to it.
Mhm.
Let's read chapter 15. You are seeing, my son, the very face and form, so to speak, of the honorable, if it could be seen with the eyes, as Plato says. It would inspire an amazing love of wisdom. Everything that is honorable arises from one of four parts. It is involved either with the perception of truth and with ingenuity, or with preserving fellowship among men, with assigning to each his own, and with faithfulness to agreements one has made, or with the greatness and strength of a lofty and unconquered spirit, or with order and limit in everything that is said and done. Modesty and restraint are included here. There's a lot in that passage right there. I'm going to keep going. Although these four are bound together and interwoven, certain kinds of duties have their origin in each individually. For example, in the part that we described as first, in which we placed wisdom and good sense, there lie the investigation and discovery of what is true, and that is the peculiar function of that virtue. So here he's basically he's giving the four virtues, right?
Right.
And he's going to now expound on them. Um, just some, I mean,
Right.
he's going to root it in virtue. He's going to root it in nature, and yeah, I like the way he doesn't just come out and say it right yet. He knows that everyone talks about virtue. Well, I'm kind of going to hint at it, right? He's rhetorically he's building you toward it, right? He's leading you there. Oh, yeah. Any thoughts on this little transitional paragraph here?
Yeah, well, he's walking, as you said, he's walking us through the virtues he's just expounded. So he talks about virtue, the honorable, which is what we're pursuing. We want to do honorable things, to be honorable in ourselves. Its origins are in one of four places: in the love of truth, and that comes under the category of wisdom; in seeking to benefit the community, and that's justice. That also involves giving to each what is due. That's the sort of the classic definition of justice. um, to have a lofty, unconquered spirit. And here's that third virtue, the virtue of great spiritedness, of being sort of, bold and sort of noble, what I've tried to call nobility before. and of orderliness and limit, self-control, moderation, sort of seeing the order of the cosmos and bringing it within yourself to control and order yourself correctly. And the only other note I have from this chapter is that for some duties that we have, will come more some responsibilities or appropriate actions. Keep in mind that the translation of officium here, more like what is appropriate, what is needful, will be more in one of these areas than in another. So we're going to be talking in what's ahead of the interrelation between these different virtues, how you might perform a certain action or have a certain duty, which would proceed from more than one of these sources, or maybe just
Hmm.
primarily from one. So he's beginning to sort of set out and fill in the details for his son's sake of the kind of advice he's going to be giving us.
Great. Why don't you read then, because that's how we conclude this section here. If you could read both chapters 16 and 17, this gets to the
Mhm.
relation of the four virtues to each other, which we're already starting there. But yeah, go ahead and
Okay.
read 16 and 17.
Absolutely. For when a man is extremely good at perceiving what is most true in each particular thing, and when he is able with great acuity and speed to see and to explain the reason, then he is rightly considered extremely sensible and wise. Therefore, the thing that underlies this virtue, the matter, as it were, that it handles and treats, is truth. As for the other three virtues, their aim is necessities. They are to procure and to conserve whatever is required for the activities of life, in order both to preserve the fellowship and bonding between men and to allow excellence and greatness of spirit to shine out, both in increasing influence and in acquiring benefits for oneself and those dear to one, and also and much more in disdaining the very same things. Again, order, constancy, moderation, and the qualities similar to these are associated with the group that requires not only mental activity, but also some action. For we shall conceive honorableness and seemliness. We shall conserve honorableness and seemliness if we apply some limit and order to the things with which we deal in our life. That's the
I
end of
want to
chapter
get to that.
17.
Yeah, and I want to get we'll just a few more comments before we end this episode, but we I want to get to that disdain word here in a minute. Um, because here it sounds like, okay, on the one hand, wisdom, you want to go for truth here. That's the end of this pursuit
Mhm.
to quickly and accurately pursue what is true. And that underlies that virtue. But the other ones deal with necessities. Now, one of the ways I think we can read that there is kind of a kind of practical and theoretical reason in a way. He's not using those words, but in a way that the wisdom deals with more the theoretical, I don't know if speculative is the right word, but
Mhm.
theoretical side of it, pursuing truth. And then the rest of them are like, okay, what do we need to do with what we have right now? Right? How do we act in the world as it is, necessarily historically where we are, right? Not just applying some principle to the world. What's the word? Casuistry, right? It's not
Right.
just kind of forcing our principles onto the world, but realizing, like, look, he doesn't use the word fortuna, right, as Machiavelli will, but he's kind of talking in a similar vein in the sense that, look, you have to play the hand you're dealt. Wisdom helps you see the truth no matter what hand you're dealt. But these other three virtues are going to help you live in a world that where you can't control these things, but you can control how you respond to them.
Right.
And then finally he says, but you disdain these things, which to me is a little is I mean, is that just him being very Plato-ish, right? These changing things, these this worldly realities and necessities are frustrating, right? That
Right.
I disdain them, but I got to deal with them. Like I can't ignore it. Is that how you read that?
Yeah, I think so. Later on, Boethius will have Lady Philosophy say that, we safe within the fortress of wisdom, we look down upon the forces of the world and we disdain them, we laugh at them, we sort of hold ourselves aloof because what they have is
Mhm.
nothing. But I think here there is, you're right here, there's something kind of anti-Platonic in Cicero's whole orientation. I was thinking here of the way he deals first with wisdom and says, that's fine, but everything else treats with what's needful, with necessities. That he is, of course, writing to his son who is studying in Athens, and he's previously warned him, in a sense, don't get sort of too full of yourself that you're reading philosophy in Greek at the heart of the sort of origin of philosophy. Don't get so inside your head that you think that this sort of Platonic outside the cave, contemplation is the true goal of human life. The That's one virtue, but the other virtues, just as important, maybe the key virtues for life, are going to be the ones that take you back down into the cave, that have you deal with the contingent circumstances of your own place and time, your social station, the limitations that that imposes, and doing well and being excellent, being a great spirited man there. So I think you're quite right about that, including it's not a concession to Fortuna in the sense that we we we're her plaything, but that we need to have a certain kind of. I'd love to talk to somebody whose Latin philology is very good about just the tenor of this word disdain that's come up now twice in this episode.
Yeah.
But we
Yeah.
have a certain aloofness from worldly things, but we still use them and act upon them because that's the arena in which we demonstrate our virtue.
Yeah, and I'm hoping that, by the way, as we conclude this episode, that we do get at least one Latin philologist on here. I know a couple, but there's a lot to deal with there, and I'm grateful that you all joined us for this episode. Again, we haven't gotten that far into this book, but look how rich it is. Look how much it offers for this discussion when you read it with other people. And so I hope that you have been blessed by these first 17 chapters of book one. In our next episode, we're going to look at wisdom. He deals with it in just 2 chapters, but there's a lot there. We look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the On Duties podcast. I am Josh Bowman, Executive Director of the Ciceronian Society, and we're reading Cicero's most influential work, On Duties, De Officiis, and seeing what it inspires in us, what kind of conversation it provokes. We're using the Cambridge Text and History of Political Thought version of this, the translation by Griffin and Atkins. And I am joined today by my good friend, Chris Anadale.
Hi. Hi, Josh. I'm Chris Anadale, Associate Professor of Philosophy at Mount St. Mary's University and a longtime contributor to the Ciceronian Society.
Thank you so much, Chris. Sorry, when I gestured over to you, I hit my computer. Hope everyone didn't get sick there. If you're listening, you don't know, but if you're watching on YouTube, you now you wonder if you just had a stroke. Well, let's last few episodes, we've it's all introductory material. He's writing to his son. He's laying out honorableness, if it's beneficial or not, when they conflict with each other, what is duty, and he's going to root this in the human nature, human reason, and especially the four virtues. And finally, after these episodes, we're finally getting to the first virtue, wisdom. He's not going to talk about it a ton. It doesn't mean that it's not important. It means that, as Chris has been saying throughout these episodes, Cicero is a man of action. You can't. It's not just about thinking. Thinking well and thinking right is important, but you have to live. You have to act in the world that you find yourself in. So let's start with chapter 18. This is book 1, chapter 18. We have divided the nature and power of that which is honorable under 4 headings. The first of these, that consisting of the learning of truth, most closely relates to human nature. For all of us feel the pull that leads us to desire to learn and to know. We think it a fine thing to excel in this, while considering it bad and dishonorable to stumble, to wander, to be ignorant, to be deceived. In this category, which is both natural and honorable, one must avoid 2 faults. First, we should not take things that have not been ascertained for things that have, and rashly assent to them. Anyone who wants to avoid that fault, as everyone indeed should, will take time and care when he ponders any matter. So a couple things right away that strike me here. First of all, as he's laid out the different, what distinguishes humans from animals. We want to learn, we want to know. He would hate the phrase that ignorance is bliss, right? That just doesn't make sense to the ancient mind. Why would you ever want to be ignorant? But you can also see, there is a sense in which you understand why someone gets to that point, and maybe we can talk about that as we go. There is something in which, like, when you know more about the world, especially today, when you know more about what's going on, does it bring you joy or does it bring you frustration and despair? Right? So there is a sense in which, uh, if you've ever met someone who can qualify as ignorant, you don't act like you don't know someone in that category. Sometimes they seem happier, sometimes they don't. Are they truly happy? Right? Is Cicero wrong or right here? I think that's an open question. Um, and this also gets to, what is he going to mean by, ignorant and knowledgeable? Uh, is 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 there a hidden arrogance here as well, right? Is there something dangerous about that knowledge that actually could lead you astray? This, of course, is going to come up, and is this with Christianity? Jesus will, the Bible will say, the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. That whole dichotomy. Is that counter Cicero? I don't think so. But I also think there is an interesting uh, tr contrast here between perhaps wisdom in the Christian sense and wisdom in the classical sense. Are they the same? And then he gets to, in this category, you want to avoid the first fault. The first fault, really vague here. We should not take things that have not been ascertained for things that have, and rashly assent to them. Anyone who wants to avoid that fault, as anyone indeed should, will take time and care when he ponders any matter. What does it mean for something to be ascertained? I mean, does it? I mean, you can. Is it because he doesn't have the scientific method? Is he okay? Well, it's not. It has not been ascertained. Who gets to decide what has and has not been ascertained? I don't know. What do you? Those two thoughts. The first being, um, that it's part of human nature. Don't be ignorant, and also don't assent to anything that hasn't been ascertained. What are your thoughts on those two pieces?
Well, excuse me. I think interestingly here, he says the love of truth is most closely connected to human nature. So, of all the things about us, it seems that this is the one that cuts closest to the core of what we are. All of us feel the pull that leads to the desire to learn and to know. We all approve of learning. We all disapprove of ignorance. And there's something we might either call this wisdom or naivete, depending upon our modern attitude. We might tend to think of ignorance as being a problem chiefly because it leads to errors in practice. Like if you're wrong
Mm,
about the world, you'll make bad choices, and then the world will treat you harshly. You'll suffer pain or loss as a result of your acting upon your ignorance. But I think
mm,
here in classical Roman style, Cicero's going deeper on this, that right down written like right into the sort of source code of human nature is a desire and of to a desire for truth and approbation of learning and a sort of instinctive kind of disgust or disdain for people who are deliberately or blamefully ignorant or in error. And he just takes that, he's just asserting this, of course, for his son and for us, but this is just the way it is in with human beings. We might ask again, do we have a more modern attitude where we think of reason as being practical? And the trouble with
mm,
ignorance and error is that it leads you to do things that result in your desires being frustrated, to not having as good an outcome as you would want, that it frustrates your will. So that's my first take on that, is that he's
mm,
really giving us this kind of anthropology where love of truth is very close to the heart of what it means to be human. And to not love truth sufficiently is to fail at being human in a very significant way, that's not just cashed out in terms of practical problems. My second take here, I think, is that the first error he gives us, I don't know about ascertaining. I don't know, again, I don't know the Latin. Perhaps we can consult a scholar on that. Is that um, the first error is to rashly assent. It's just simply to make mistakes. It's to believe that what is false is true, or to believe something to be true where it really is a better candidate for some kind of doubt. So you want to avoid that. And that's the sort of obvious problem that nobody wants to be wrong. So first rule, don't be wrong, and take steps to ensure that you don't rush ahead and form a bunch of beliefs that are or could be wrong. Maybe the one reason this is dealt with quickly is that a lot of this stuff is pretty obvious to anybody who's thought about the life of the mind. So
mm.
those are my first reactions.
For, first rule for being right: don't be wrong. Or But there's also this sense in which, and this is certainly true today, right? I want this to be true, therefore it is true. That
Yep.
does not mean it has been ascertained. It just means it's desired. I want
Right.
the truth, whether I want it well, I want the truth, whether the reality is what I would prefer or not. Does that make sense?
Right. Fundamental failure of prudence. Yeah.
Right, right. And so I think he's getting to that. Also interesting, there's a footnote here. Of the two faults mentioned, the first reflects Cicero's profound dislike of dogmatism, which made the skeptical academic tradition so attractive to him.
Mhm.
So
Yep.
I think there's also a sense in which if dogmatism is kind of it's a truth that's asserted but not ascertained. Yeah, if you think of
Mhm.
ascertained as being the opposite of asserted,
Mhm.
I mean, I guess you can assert what has been ascertained. But what I'm saying is that I could just say 2 + 2 = 5, and you're like, no, we have ascertained that 2 + 2 = 4.
Mhm.
So you can't, no matter how much you assert that, no matter how much you want it to be true, it
Mhm.
cannot be true.
Right.
And I think that's where he's saying like it's obvious, but in, in 2026 now, it's not as we take for granted how obvious that is. Yeah.
Right.
Why don't you go ahead and read chapter 19 then, and we'll look at that second fault.
Okay. We're on page 8 here. The second fault is that some men bestow excessive devotion and effort upon matters that are both abstruse and difficult and unnecessary. When those faults are avoided, then the amount of effort and care that is given to things honorable and worth learning will rightly be praised, just as we have heard happened regarding Gaius Sulpicius in astronomy, and as we have learnt ourselves regarding Sextus Pompeius in geometry, many men in dialectical arguments, and yet more in civil law, for these arts are all associated with the investigation of what is true. It is, however, contrary to duty to be drawn by such a devotion away from practical achievements. All the praise that belongs to virtue lies in action. On the other hand, there is often a break from it, and we are given many opportunities to return to our studies. Besides, the activity of the mind, which is never at rest, can maintain in us our pursuit of learning even without effort on our part, for reflective movements of the spirit occur in one of two ways: either when taking counsel about honorable matters that pertain to living well and blessedly, or in the pursuit of knowledge and learning. We have now discussed the first source of duty. That's the final line of chapter 19.
Right. There's a lot there.
Mhm.
It's the first source of duty is again these two chapters are on wisdom. The second fault, I'm going to read that again, is that some men bestow excessive devotion and effort upon matters that are both abstruse and difficult and unnecessary. This was going back to the footnote. It says the second fault reflects Roman priorities, which also led Cicero to justify his philosophical writing in terms of his involuntary exclusion from public life and his hope of helping his countrymen in another way. Devotion and effort upon matters that are both abstruse and difficult and unnecessary. D- does this is he discouraging other philosophers or just maybe I'm misreading it because when I read that it sounds I immediately think of people who are like they're obsessed with something that is really complicated but just profoundly uninteresting and doesn't really help anyone. Again, I don't think that's what he's getting at because he seems to appreciate the pursuit of truth for its own sake. I mean, but at the same time, he's going to say later, right, in the same chapter, that all praise that belongs to virtue lies in action. So, what's the point, for example, of learning Old English, right? What action are you going to take if you love Old English? Which again, I'm not discouraging, just to let our audience know. But why learn Elvish, right? Which I want to do. I want everyone to know. Um,
What are you going to do with that?
right. What am I gonna do? That's right. I'm gonna find. Yeah. What are you gonna do with that degree, Chris? You can go to the philosophy factory. Um, but there is what is he getting at here? He's trying to justify himself. He's trying to back up his philosophical writing. Is he just trying to say, look, at least I'm doing philosophy that matters to action? Is that what he's saying?
I think that's part of it. I mean, there's the sort of what I described before as kind of Athens versus Rome, right? The sort of,
Hmm.
the elite kind of, outside of the cave, Platonism versus the let's make a difference in the world, let's create and govern the republic, etc. But I think there's also this distinction he's made previously back in chapter 17 between this kind of purely intellectual virtue of wisdom, which is love of truth, and then the other three virtues, which he says aim at necessities. That is, what is needful, right? What we have to do in order to live well in this life. These are the virtues of action. This is where I said before, Cicero's heart is going to be, and I think that's really where his ambition for his son is as well. He's
Hmm.
he's praised love of truth. He said it's closest to our nature, and in terms of um, the second error to avoid is to overvalue love of truth separated from the life of action, from the
Hmm.
arena of politics, from which, as the footnote notes, from which he's now been excluded. He's writing this in the final year or so of his life before his execution, that he's no longer able to do these great and noble deeds. But a fantastic line, right? All the praise that belongs to virtue lies in action. So if you're going to become wise, well, to what end? For what action will you take
Hmm.
as a man in the world as a result of your wisdom, using your wisdom? Don't think of it as this kind of bank account that you have to pile up a higher and higher balance in. That's the wrong way to think about wisdom, which I think is his second the second error, that second fault that one can have in respect to wisdom is this kind of meta fault, of valuing wisdom inordinately and in the wrong way, which neglects the life of action, which is what the rest of this discussion of virtue is going to be about.
Right, right. Cicero does not is not an ivory tower philosopher. He is a
No,
forum
absolutely not.
philosopher, right? He wants to get in the forum. He wants to get his hands dirty, and he's upset that in this point in his life he can't. At least
Right.
not without getting killed quite quickly. Um, I also think it looks ahead to the issue of ideology too, if depending on how you define it. Namely that because the other fault here would be, and I don't think Cicero adds this, is that you can have these great ideas, although they're not necessarily true, where you have these great ideas and intentions and beliefs, and you've ascertained them, presumably, but when put into action, they don't do what you expect them to do. They don't achieve the goals and the ends for which uh, you hope that they would. And so I think in some ways, Cicero's also saying, look, if it's there's right there's let's just keep reading that. All the praise that belongs to virtue lies in action. Is it virtuous to be a utopian? Let me say it that way. And I think again that word doesn't exist yet, but that's what Cicero I think is could also get at here, where he's saying there's no point in praising something that cannot be, right? And that's what becomes dangerous later on, is you have the mass ideological movements and others of the 19th and 20th century in particular, where you have people like, I mean, let's just go with the easy one, Hitler, right? Who I would not say that he has wisdom, but he certainly has ideas, right? And they are not. He doesn't care whether they've been ascertained. He wants this to be true, and he's excessive devotion to that idea. The idea is more important than people themselves, more important than reality. His
Mhm.
vision is more important than reality. I'm taking Cicero way beyond what he's intending here, but you could also say, I mean, is Caesar guilty of this? Is Caesar was Caesar wise?
Mhm.
Did Caesar fail at these two faults? Right. I don't know. What are your thoughts? That's actually an interesting question. Is Caesar guilty here?
Yeah, that's good. That's a
Is
great
he?
question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Um,
think we could add here as well. One condition of virtue, of virtuous action, is success. Right? You've got to succeed
mm,
in doing virtuous deeds, so for the benefit of the community, to elevate yourself, your spirit, et cetera, et cetera. If you're not able to succeed, then what use are you? That doesn't deserve praise. So that
mhm.
seems to be another element of the kind of life that Cicero is praising. It's virtue in action, successful for bringing about the good. And these
Hmm.
are, if you look ahead to the modern period, you think these are things that Machiavelli will begin sort
Yeah.
of prying apart, right? That, well, can we be successful without being virtuous? But for Cicero, I think who against whom Machiavelli is arguing in part, those things are just tightly tied together. So I
Hmm.
think to be wise is to, arrive at the correct uh, beliefs, and also to value wisdom as an abstraction appropriately and not inappropriately, and then turn your attention towards living, doing virtuous deeds, living a life of virtuous action. It's the Aristotelian element in that, in the world, in the arena. And so that seems to me to be, his chief advice to his son. The first source of duty is, well, get to the truth, be wise, act in light of that.
And then he gives examples, which frankly I'm not that familiar with. Sulpicius in astronomy, Sextus Pompeius in geometry, many men in dialectical arguments, and yet more in civil law, for these arts are all associated with that. Um,
The effort and care given to things honorable and worth learning will rightly be praised, well, provided that you haven't fallen into error or overvalued the intellectual as opposed to the active.
right. So let's look at this passage after that then. So he says, all the praise that belongs to virtue lies in action. Then he says, on the other hand, there is often a break from it, and we are given many opportunities to return to our studies. Besides, the activity of the mind, which is never at rest, can maintain in us our pursuit of learning even without effort on our part.
Mhm.
For reflective movements of the spirit, I like that, occur in one of two ways: either when taking counsel about honorable matters that pertain to living well and blessedly, or in the pursuit of knowledge and learning. So he's not saying don't study, just act, right?
Right.
But he is saying like you don't feel like you need to run away from the active life. There are ways that you can continue to develop your mind, develop wisdom, um, either when taking counsel about honorable matters. So he's like, don't do this alone. And I think we could say here, counsel from teachers living and not living, right? That I can take counsel from Augustine. I can take counsel from Aquinas. I can take counsel from many people, from Cicero, of course, right? And but also from those around um, that pertain well to living well and blessedly, or just in the pursuit of knowledge and learning, right? This is what education is, right? It's that there is a place for education in some way, for intellectual formation of some kind, and that we shouldn't disdain that at all. We just don't want to commit the second fault, which is
Mhm.
over devotion. Is that a word? Over devotion to it.
Yeah, I
Uh,
like it.
yeah. So yeah, there's some those last two those two ways for reflective movements of the spirit. I like that.
Mhm. Yeah, I think reading this again, I was sort of in dad mode again. I'm a father of adult and teenage children, and I take part of what he's doing here again, thinking that he's writing to his son, is he's saying, all uh, all praise that belongs to virtue lies in action, and he's thinking your immediate objection will be, look, I can't be a man of action. I have to devote myself to my books, to my studies. I have to, learn more to fill my mind more. So his immediate, dad reaction is there is often a break from study. I'm sorry, from the life of action. You'll have a chance to go back to your studies. So it's not as though when you enter the arena, you have to be 24/7 on doing active things and never learning again. And furthermore, when your mind is at rest, even when you're not specifically, hitting the books, reading, thinking, contemplating, engaging in conversation about philosophy, your mind is still gaining wisdom and using this kind of wisdom. So I think he's in a sense defending his advice to his son to live and devote himself to the active life, not to think of withdrawing from the world and becoming an ivory tower scholar. That was my take on that. So the rest of that was aimed at sort of explaining to him why any of his initial hesitancy about this prioritization of action over the intellectual life in the purest sense is is valuable.
It makes me also think of the distinction we'll hear on college campuses of there's the classroom and the so-called real world, right?
Mhm.
It makes you wonder. I mean, on the one hand, you can kind of see the critique in which it's hard to reflect on actions in life and challenges you haven't faced yet, right? So if I go to college and I take a class on parenting, but I've never had kids, I could learn a lot,
Mhm.
but I mean, the amount of reflection I've done since having kids is hilariously different, right? There's a lot to be said about the fact that no textbook could have taught me most of this.
Right.
Does that mean education is worthless? No, but I wonder sometimes if there's something to what he's saying here where do we have it wrong? I don't know if this is the case or not. Do we go to college, get all this wisdom, but we're not doing anything, presumably? Like, would he look at the modern university and say, What are you doing, Chris? You're just teaching philosophy. You're reading all these great books, but none of your students are doing anything. They're just working in downtown Emmitsburg, and maybe they're going to DC. I mean, they're probably at a restaurant somewhere. I don't know if the Carriage Inn is still there. I used to love that place, but there's there's a lot to be said about, like, is he unintentionally critiquing modern education separation of gaining wisdom and action, or is that the wrong way to look at it?
Oh, I think it seems like a valid critique. I mean, I think the Ciceronian critique of the modern university might go in the direction of what are you doing to train your students in the practice of the other three virtues? How are you making
Yeah.
them just? How are they engaging in political society and in doing good and noble things? That can be done through student government, perhaps, and in other areas on campus. How are they becoming great spirited? How are they pursuing moderation in their lives? So looking at something more like a kind of whole self formation, that I think
Hmm.
would be the direction that he would push modern universities in, as opposed to kind of a research and purely intellectual focus.
Well, that's also interesting too when you think about, because on the one hand, he's not at the pursuit of wisdom is not so much the pursuit of skills, right?
Mhm.
if
Right.
if I understand it right, that there's what's the word, techne, like he's not pursuing, he's trying to put all the different pieces together about what is wisdom, what is truth, what is beauty, what is goodness. That realizes itself in action. The skills will come later. Today
Mhm.
modern education can get really obsessed with skills, right? What are you going to do with this? How are you going to use this in your life?
Mhm.
Well, in some ways you don't know yet, but also life is not just about the application of skills. And so that's why I think things like philosophy and history are so important, because it may not be obvious to you right now why you're taking this class, but life's going to throw a lot of different things at you, and you need more than just skill, right?
Mhm.
You need more than just the ability to apply some kind of tool or mathematical equation to this problem, some kind of best practices language, right? Right? The world doesn't work like that. You need
Right.
the ability to reflect on what is true and what is needful, what is honorable, what is beneficial. How am I
Mhm.
going to act in the world today with what I have? And I think philosophy and history and other disciplines, literature actually, I think helps with this, helps you think through that more carefully in a way that brings wisdom, and I think would challenge much of modern education.
Yeah, I agree. I think that a virtue-focused education unites the student to reality, to the reality upon which he'll be acting, which he does act in the
Mhm.
course of trying to of being virtuous. I think a skills-based education is more about sort of placing tools within reach of the individual student's will in order to achieve his whatever his objects of desire are. That seems much
Hmm.
more modern, and it's based, I think, upon a much thinner anthropology than the one that Cicero is relying upon and articulating here.
Right. In the chapters previous, right, he's giving that thicker anthropology of a
Mhm.
of of a of a more advanced, reasonable animal. He doesn't really get to the religious or spiritual side here. I don't know why. I mean, his relationship to religion is weird. He's not an atheist,
Mhm.
but uh, Yeah, I mean he's the one who invents the word, right? Religion. He's as far as we know, he's the one who actually brings it to our attention. He doesn't bring it up here because I think there'd be a lot here to to build on. There's also the sense of what do you do with the mystery, right? I don't think he has a great answer for that necessarily. There, on the one hand, he'd say you have to respond to necessity, you have to respond to the world you find yourself in. But where's the place for faith, right? I mean, this is where the classical world doesn't know what to do with later Christians in the sense that why would you, to go back to the first fault, why would you act on something that hasn't necessarily been ascertained yet? Well, the weird thing I would say about Christianity in particular is sometimes you do have to act in faith on something that has not been ascertained or necessarily asserted, but you're acting in faith. And then you realize, oh, it is true, right?
Yeah.
It's the leap of faith you see in what's the Indiana Jones movie, right? Um,
Last Crusade.
the, that Last Crusade, thanks. Right. It's that leap of faith. To me, Cicero doesn't offer that, but I think I would like to leave our listeners with there's more to the story here, right? Wisdom is what is the relationship between wisdom and faith? What does that look like? I think that's an open question. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think this is in a sense this is Cicero at his most Roman. Go ahead, please.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, we have covered a lot of ground in this episode, I think, on wisdom. Just 2 chapters, but this is the first virtue. Now we're going to talk about the other three through the next few books. And there's a lot to worry about here or to deal with here. The next one we're going to talk about is justice, and that's going to take us through several episodes. He deal or the social virtues, as he calls it. We think about negative justice, positive justice. What is injustice? How do we avoid injustice? What is liberality? That he fits that under the themes of justice as well, if I'm understanding this correctly. But a lot to cover. We hope to see you in future episodes. We're going to have some guests come up soon. I know you're probably sick of hearing our voices and seeing our faces. Not sorry, but we are looking forward to bringing some more Ciceronian Society members and friends on this journey with us. So thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.